In a huge suburban mansion by the pool sunbathed the young beautiful daughter of the owner, Emily Smith. Her father was the owner of several large banks in the city, so the family lived in luxury. Emily was frankly bored. She drank a cocktail with ice, and suddenly she wanted to see her fiancé Jason and forget herself in his hot embrace. She dialed his number and said crankily, "Hi Jason, I missed you so much. Come over right away. Daddy's not here and I'm so lonely." The guy replied irritably, "Emily, I can't right now. I have practice at the department. You know that. The patient's waiting. I got work to do. I miss you too, my little fish. I'll fly back tonight as soon as I'm free." Emily pouted her lips and got angry. She wasn't used to rejection. Her wishes had to be honored immediately. Her father had taught her that. "You know what, honey? Why don't I look for another fiancé? You're always busy with lectures, practicing, helping your father, and I'm always in last place." "Oh, that's not bad. Don't call me." Jason was upset. He tried calling his fiancée many times, but she didn't pick up the phone on purpose. The guy was working himself up into a frenzy, worried that she wasn't feeling well. Maybe she overheated in the sun, or sick. He couldn't stand it, asked off for an hour and rushed to his beloved to find out everything. Emily saw her beau panting and glowed. Thinking to herself, he's come so fast, she began to embrace her fiancé, kissing him warmly, whispering, "Well, finally, do not stand. Undress and bathe, sunbathe. You'll give me a massage." And more. Jason, though resentful that his fiancée had snapped him out of his work, just couldn't resist. He returned the kiss and gently reprimanded her. "Honey, you're just so selfish. But I still love you." After passionate pleasures, Groom left, and Emily stayed in bed and thought, how good is life? Emily's mother died very young, and her father raised her alone, loved her to bits and indulged her every whim. She had everything she could dream of, an expensive car, fancy jewelry and outfits. She could travel at any time, and there was always money on the card. She graduated from a prestigious university purely formally. Her father paid for everything correctly. She didn't think of working in her specialty. Why, if she didn't need money at all? She'd been seeing Jason for a long time. It was her father's decision. The guy came from a wealthy family too. His dad and Emily's dad were longtime partners. But unlike Emily, Jason was studying to be a surgeon. In his final year of medical school, he was on fire. He loved what he did and wanted to make it on his own. He was so proper and decent that Emily was sick of him. He was often boring, and everything was boring. I wanted some new emotions and bright adventures. The girl reluctantly, leisurely gathered tastefully, dressed and decided to take a ride through the boutiques to see the new collection of outfits. And suddenly, near the showcase with designer shoes, she came nose to nose with her old girlfriend. Emily even shrieked. "Ashley Wilson, is that you? What a reunion. Are you dressed up too? Why don't you just stand outside and come in?" Her friend blushed and smiled. "Hi, Emily, it's been so long since we've seen each other. Yes, I sometimes come here, stand, admire, but you know, I cannot afford such expensive shoes. So what's the point of coming in? Well, I'm going to run. I'm tired. My feet are buzzing after my shift, and I'm about to fall apart." But Emily took her by the elbow. "Come on, Ashley. I haven't seen you in ages, and you're already leaving. Come on, let's go to the cafeteria and sit and talk. I haven't had dinner yet, by the way. I'd love to, but I don't have enough in my purse to buy a coffee. I'm 2 weeks away from payday, so I'm probably gonna pass." Her friend calmed her down. "I don't worry about money. I'll pay for everything. Come on, tell me how you are, where you work. You haven't gotten married yet. I'm curious about you. I mean, you and I were such good friends when we were kids." Ashley lived in an ordinary apartment with her mom and sister. It was just family, nothing special. But the girls surprisingly became fast friends. Emily, despite her rich family, was never greedy, willingly shared expensive toys and often called her friend to visit. Emily's father did not like this friendship too much, but he did not forbid, realized that his daughter needs communication. In addition, Ashley was modest, polite, and excellent student. She helped Emily with her studies, pulling her up in various subjects. When the girls were in their senior year of high school, their paths diverged. Emily moved with her father to a country mansion and lost touch with her friend. But today they unexpectedly met. Ashley told me, "After high school, I wanted to go to medical school for pediatrics. But where did I go? I didn't qualify, and I didn't have a lot of money. So I graduated from medical school. Now I work as a nurse at the hospital. I like the job, but the pay is disappointing. I'm dating this guy Kyle, he's got great hands. But so far, he's just trying his hand at this and that. Look at this picture. Isn't he handsome? Emily looked at the picture, expecting to see a worker, but the guy impressed her. Black hair, a bold look, a strong chin, that was the kind of man she liked. Not like her Jason, white-haired and unimpressive, and a funny thought popped into her head. Look, Ashley, I have a fiancé too. He's a banker's son, studying to be a doctor, almost a surgeon, but he's so boring. He's always talking about his patients. He doesn't like to have any fun. I was thinking, why don't we make a joke and swap fiances for a week? You know, it's not like we're getting intimate. I just want a change of pace. Spend time with a different guy than my Jason. He'll have a lot to say about medical stuff. Ashley laughed. Emily, you've got to be kidding me. How do you see it? Who am I and who's your Jason? You're with him. And Kyle's a different kind of guy. Besides, guys aren't things to change. They're not going to go for that. But Emily was unstoppable. A plan was already forming in her head. It's simple. You tell Kyle there's a good part-time construction job. A friend of mine is looking for a handyman, and I'll pay him well. I'll tell Jason that her friend needs to get some knowledge and experience so she can go to university. It makes sense. I'll get Kyle back to you in a week. Don't worry. We'll share our experiences. Maybe it'll shake things up with Jason, or maybe you'll see things differently. Who knows? You've got nothing to lose. Your fiancé's going to make a lot of money. So, do we have a deal? Natasha thought about it and agreed, even though she didn't like the idea. But money was tight, and Kyle was looking for part-time work. That evening at dinner, she said casually, I ran into an old childhood friend of mine, Emily, today. We got to talking, and I bragged that my boyfriend is a construction worker, and she's offering a part-time job in your specialty. If you're interested, I can give you her number. Kyle immediately perked up. That's great, of course I want to. Our site is frozen, and this is a chance to work. We've been eating soup and pasta for 3 days now. I'm sick of it all. Give me your phone number. I'll call you right away. What's the holdup? After talking for a while, Kyle agreed to meet tomorrow. Ashley had mixed feelings about the whole thing. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but she had her doubts. What if Kyle fell in love with rich, beautiful Emily? He'd leave me. I couldn't live without him. Oh, what am I doing? Ryan became cheerful after the conversation, and the rest of the evening went wonderfully. They watched a love comedy, cuddled up together, and made rainbow plans for the future. Early in the morning, Ashley Wilson received a text message 6:00 p.m. Today, auditorium number 7, and the address of the medical school. Emily Smith called to let her know that Jason would be waiting for her there to study. Her friend thought they'd worked it out well, and that everything was going right. But Ashley didn't share her joy, looking at the man she loved asleep, and not wanting to share him with anyone. Emily looked stunning. A light silk dress with a deep neckline, loose long hair, and almost imperceptible skillful makeup. Ryan saw her and froze on the doorstep, but after a second he pulled himself together and said hello cheerfully. Hi, I'm Ryan. We called yesterday. I'm here for work. I can't help myself, by the way. And yet I have to say, you are a goddess. I've never seen such a beautiful girl before, like a magazine cover model. Emily laughed. You're quite a guy. Thanks for the compliments, but you have a fiancée, my girlfriend. Is she any less beautiful to you? Ryan had a point. I love Ashley, but she's different. She's got a simple image, and you're special, you're ethereal. I just admire a girl's natural beauty. Is that a sin? The mistress was angry. She already thought herself irresistible. But when strangers say that to you, it's doubly gratifying. Ryan, let's use the first name. I feel like an old lady. We're the same age. So let's get down to business. Afterward, they discussed the details of building a dog enclosure based on Emily's design. Ryan agreed to take the job. That's not my concern, Emily said playfully. You'll go with my chauffeur and buy everything yourself, but that's tomorrow. Now, please come to the table. Let's have a cocktail. Let's go and get to know each other. If you want, we can go swimming in the pool. It's so hot. Is that okay with you? Ryan lost his mind over this well-groomed beauty and immediately began to undress. Emily looked at his muscular body, his abs, and her eyes sparkled. They spent the rest of the evening frolicking, swimming. Ryan jokingly taught Emily how to swim and went crazy touching her body in the water. All in all, their acquaintance turned out to be very intimate. Ashley drove to the university as agreed after work, knocked timidly and entered the auditorium. A tall, skinny guy with glasses was waiting for her. He looked appraisingly at the pleasant short girl in a simple mesh dress and sandals and said hello. "Good evening. You're Ashley. My name is Jason. Emily asked me to work out with you. I'm very honored. Anything I can do to help. It's always nice to see someone with a passion for medicine. So, what are you interested in?" The girl blushed, barely got it out. "Thank you for agreeing to help. Sorry to interrupt. It's just that there's no money for tutors, and I really want to enter next year. I'm still working as a nurse in the surgical ward. I'm gaining experience. I know it's not really your area of expertise, so I prepared some of my toughest topics here. If you can help me, I'd love it." Jason smiled and began to tell her the material. He was pleased to be talking to a smart and inquisitive girl. Ashley listened attentively, taking notes. Before they knew it, the tension and shyness had disappeared. An hour later, they both walked out of the classroom as old friends. Jason liked Ashley very much as a person, simple, polite. "Well, I think the class was a success, but don't get too comfortable. Here's what you need to prepare for the next class. I'll be checking. But let's not do it here. Let's do it in a cafe. I know a quiet place nearby. You can have a coffee and a snack, and no one will disturb you, okay? And remember, never stop believing in your dreams." Ashley decided to become a doctor. "Good for you. You're going after what you want. And you're going to get there. And I'll help you in any way I can." Ashley smiled. "And thank you for your help and encouragement. I'll look forward to the next class." The next day, Jason was waiting for Ashley at the cafe. As agreed, he prepared the literature and found his notes. But the girl surprised him. She came not alone, but with a boy of about 5 years old and, embarrassed, said, "Hi, Jason, do you mind that I came with Johnny? He's my dead sister Amber's son. I'm raising him now. That's just the way it is. Johnny's a smart, quiet boy. He won't get in our way. I try not to leave him alone. He's just a little boy." The girl took out notebooks and colored felt-tip pens from her bag and said affectionately to her nephew, "Johnny, you draw while it's good, and then I'll buy you ice cream or juice." Jason asked in surprise, "Wow, I admire you, to be honest. You've got a child on your own, you're working, and you've decided to go to college. How different people can be. Good for you. What about Johnny's father? Isn't he raising the boy? I'm sorry to ask you this, but if you don't want to, don't tell me." Ashley replied calmly. Amber and her husband used to rock climb. They used to go to the mountains a lot. They loved the extreme. But one day, tragedy struck. Her sister fell from a height and crashed to her death. And her husband Brad got cold feet, gave up his son and moved far away. He kept saying he couldn't replace Johnny's mother, that he wasn't ready to bear the responsibility alone. What was I supposed to do? Let my nephew go to the orphanage. Johnny was used to me from the time he was a baby. My sister had left him with me before, so how could I leave him in the lurch? So I got a guardianship. I'm doing the best I can. I'm torn between work and the baby. The Fiancés is angry the money doesn't pay very well, but no matter what, I won't give my nephew to anyone. He's my little redhead. And Johnny." The little boy smiled and looked at Ashley with such love. Jason led the class. Then they ordered pizza, ice cream, and coffee and just sat around talking about this and that. Jason was surprisingly at ease with this girl. Even though they only knew each other, he didn't have to prove anything to anyone. He could relax and just be himself. He was eager to share his accomplishments, too. "I've wanted to be a doctor since I was a little girl. My father was stubborn for a long time. He kept dreaming that I would follow in his footsteps and help him build his business. It was ridiculous. He signed me up for math classes as a child, and I secretly ran to the first aid courses. I was the best at bandages and direct heart massage. Dad, when he found out, swore for a long time, then laughed and waved goodbye. I've assisted on 2 surgeries with the best doctors. Can you imagine the responsibility? Before I went into the OR, I was so nervous, but once I got into it, I forgot all about it. I got into the whole process. They even complimented me, except Emily didn't appreciate it. She kept wrinkling her nose and telling me to stop telling horror stories. I believe my calling is to help people. I'm going to try to give every patient the best care I can." Ashley laughed. "You're an idealist. You just haven't been working at your full potential yet. In the department, you'll say give my full attention to. Yeah, we're surgeons and we're all on a tier. Sometimes we get a lot of patients on a shift. It's all about being on time and saving a man's life. I didn't sit down to rest last night. I didn't have a drink. And then there are the relatives of patients, sometimes too nervous. Sometimes they throw tantrums or won't sign off on surgery. When the question of life and death is decided literally from minute to minute, oh, it's such a whirlwind. I'm not even mentioning that dressing materials and medicines are always in short supply. The chief physician tries to beat out, but it's such a mess. So they teach us all the same thing. But in reality, everything is different. But you're right about the most important thing: we have to try to save everyone's life. You're very smart, Jason, and you're going to be the best surgeon ever. I know you will. Oh, we're getting late. It's getting dark. And Johnny and I have to go across town. Let's go. The girl started packing. Jason didn't want to leave her, did he? Ashley, let me drive you. The baby's a little sleepy. We'll talk about our next appointment. That's coming up. If you want, we could take your nephew Johnny to the park. And so the week went by like a day. Ashley was so involved with Jason that, to her shame, she hardly missed Ryan, and he only came by once. He was acting weird. He's been mostly silent. He'd said in passing that he had a lot of work to do, that he was busy. Ashley regretted thinking that things would go back to the way they were. She wouldn't see Jason again. But a deal's a deal. Jason wasn't her boyfriend. She'd have to take it as it came. But Amber and Ryan were in the middle of a torrid affair. The girl blew off the deal and had an affair. The fire was literally burning between them. The guy was the complete opposite of Jason. It was just such vivid emotions that the girl lacked. For the first few days, Ryan was still tormented by his conscience. But the guy had realized exactly what he knew about Ashley. He didn't want to be with her anymore, to share the gray everyday life with her, to take care of a stranger's boy, to count pennies. He doesn't want that kind of life. $1 million is his lucky break, a goldfish that will fulfill all his desires. She was a selfish girl. She wasn't used to having other people's feelings taken into account, so she opened the cards her own way. Ashley and Jason were supposed to meet at a restaurant. She went there with Ryan on her arm, not ashamed at all. And she shocked everyone with her confession. "What's up, girlfriend? Let's take stock. We switched fiancés on our own to test ourselves and our feelings. But I broke my promise. Ryan and I fell in love. I'm sorry, Ashley. That's the way it is. But you and Jason, it's just the way it is. I hope we stay friends." Everyone was in shock. Ashley was crying and screaming at Ryan. "How could you? You swore you loved me. We were going to get married, build a family. And you, Amber, why did you do such a mean thing? And you said we were friends." Jason clenched his fists, jumped up from his chair, and said, "Fine, you all deserve each other. I'm the only one who's a fool." I wondered what poor Ashley was going to do with her job and her nephew. She wasn't going to. Turns out it was all part of a disgusting plan. I'm sorry I misjudged you, Ashley. But you're $1 million. I didn't see that coming. Stupid rich daddy's dummy. No goals in life, no aspirations. I hope I never meet either of you again. The guy ran like a scalded man out of the restaurant, swallowing tears. Ashley ran after him all the way to the corner and yelled, "Jason, stop. Let me explain everything. Please stop. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean for it to come out like this. I'm sorry," but Jason didn't even look back. He thought he'd been fooled, and he was angry with Ashley, and his fiancée's betrayal of him had taken its toll on him. A month passed. Ryan and Amber were having a good time, and were just returning from their trip when she suddenly felt sick and vomited. She was dizzy and had a severe stomach ache. The frightened guy called an ambulance. The girl was taken to the hospital. Emily thought she was poisoned, but the doctor's verdict shocked her. She was pregnant. The girl instinctively turned to Ryan, but he waved his hands. "No, honey, don't even look at me. It's not my baby. I can't have kids at all. So all questions are for your ex. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to raise someone else's baby." Ryan hurried away. He even tried calling Ashley. She had changed her phone number and didn't want to see the cheater. Emily called her father Brad in desperation. "I'm in big trouble. I'm in so much trouble. I'm in the hospital. Come quickly. I feel so bad." Frightened businessman rushed immediately. He saw his pale daughter, immediately hugged her and pressed her against him. Emily told him everything in red. "Daddy, I'm going to have an abortion since no one wants this baby. Jason won't forgive me. And I don't love him. I don't want to live with him." Emily loved Ryan. He was so great. But he just said the baby wasn't his and ran away. "What am I going to do, Dad? I feel so bad." George Smith immediately reassured her. "I don't even think of getting rid of the baby and depriving me of my grandchild. I'll work it out. Don't worry, Ryan will come running back to you and marry you. You get some rest, daughter, and get better. I paid for a paid room. Everything will be fine. Daddy was there for her. The businessman understood that his daughter could not be allowed to raise a child alone. There would be bad rumors in high society. It will hit his reputation. So he didn't hesitate to go to Ryan's house. The guards quickly found the guy at the bar. He was pretty drunk with some friends. George Smith didn't have much to say. He grabbed the guy by the scruff of the neck and dragged him outside. Listen to me. I see you're doing well in life, seducing my daughter, having fun at our expense. And when you found out she was pregnant, you decided to run away like a coward. Ryan stared dumbfounded and excused himself. I had nothing to do with it. It's not my baby. I'm telling you for sure. I had the mumps. I can't have kids. It's Jason's baby. Let him take the blame. The businessman frowned. That's the trouble. I love my daughter more than I love $1 million of you, you asshole, even though you don't deserve it. Now it's time for a lesson. If you marry Emily and acknowledge the baby, you'll have a nice life. I'll get you a job at my company, buy you an apartment, or live in a mansion. You'll become a man. But remember, if you hurt your daughter or child, you'll have no business with me. Otherwise, you'll end up in poverty, working odd jobs. You won't have a corner of your own. I'll give you a day to think it over. George Smith let the kid go, got in his car and drove away. Ryan sobered up and thought hard. He didn't like Emily at all. Yes, she was very beautiful and rich, but he had expected an easy, uncomplicated relationship. Marriage was not in his plans at all. The guy liked freedom, fun. But on the other hand, such prospects opened up on the horizon. It's a chance to change his life. And with such an influential man as George Smith, did not want to quarrel, so the boy agreed. Emily was nervous. She couldn't find a place for herself. She really missed Ryan, really fell in love with him. She wasn't ready to be a mom, not yet. It seemed like it would ruin all her plans, and it would probably ruin her figure. But she didn't dare to disobey her father and have an abortion. He wouldn't forgive her. Suddenly the door to the room opened and Ryan walked in. Dressed smartly, carrying a huge bouquet of her favorite scarlet roses. The girl held her breath. She couldn't even believe this was all happening to her. Ryan took her in his arms without preamble and kissed her as hotly and passionately as Jason, having changed his clothes, said, "You're a great nurse, Ashley. You'll be my permanent assistant. You're easy to work with," and he left. She stood there, tears streaming down her face. Jason's attitude was worse than any torture. She wanted so badly to talk to him like she used to hear his laughter or advice, to see his eyes on her. But Jason kept his distance, day after day, discussing only work-related matters and shutting down Ashley's attempts to get personal. The nurses noticed this and teased the girl. "Ashley, have you fallen in love with our doctor? You don't look like yourself. Maybe you two can have a relationship. You're a decent, good-looking girl. He's single, too. We found out. Don't be shy. Take the initiative." Ashley waved it off. "You're imagining things, aren't you? I don't like him. I don't care about him. I'm going to take the initiative." Jason didn't know why he was acting like a hurt kid. He didn't know why he was acting like a hurt kid. It wasn't that it made him angry. It was that Ashley was taking advantage of him. And he really liked her, not just as a friend, but as a girl. He was still admiring her sad blue eyes, her slender figure, her delicate hands, seeing how she wanted him to like her, trying to get closer to him. And as if on purpose built a barrier between them, behaved coldly and indifferently. Realized that foolishly behaves, but could not overcome resentment and go to the rapprochement. He'd been quiet on the love front since his breakup with Emily. Jason had gone to work and never thought about romance. The morning at the Smith mansion didn't go well. Emily had gone out with her friends the night before for a birthday party and slept like a dead woman in her evening dress and tights on the crib. And her son Alex was crying loudly, hurting himself, but his mom wasn't coming. Ryan came in from the living room, equally annoyed, and started shaking his wife. "What kind of mother are you? What kind of mother are you? Drunk off your ass last night. Wake up, go make breakfast. It's the babysitter's day off. Or shut your son up already." Emily came to her senses, wiped her eyes. Her head was buzzing. It felt really bad. She took her son in her arms. "Quiet, Johnny, don't cry. We're going to eat now. Don't you yell. Ryan, you've been drinking for a long time. You're never home. You come home after midnight. What a father. I'm entitled to relax, too. You don't pay any attention to your son. Screaming all the time. When Dad was healthy, you were different. What's happening to us? Is this life? We fight like cats and dogs all the time. I'm tired of it all. You don't love me at all." Ryan's getting more and more violent. "Why should I love you? Look at what you've become like. It's disgusting to look at. That's how your daddy raised you. You've never worked a day in your life. All you know is how to spend money. It was your father who talked me into marrying you. I can hardly stand Johnny anymore. He's not mine. There's nothing of me in him. Why do I have to take care of him? How long is your daddy gonna live? He should be in a hospice where he belongs. I own the company now. And you're gonna live by my rules now. So get a move on, clean yourself up and make breakfast. I'm so sick of all of you, Emily exclaimed in the kitchen. The refrigerator was full of food, but the woman had never learned to cook. The omelet had gone rancid. Her son ate something. Ryan finally got angry and threw the plate in the trash. And so I had no hands. And so I still have no hands. I'm leaving on restaurant business. I'll eat. You stay home. If I find out you've been out again, you'll be sorry. At least you've taught your son something. He's 2 years old, and he doesn't speak a word. He's so dumb. Just like you, he said through gritted teeth. Ryan left, and the woman cried and looked longingly at Johnny. She realized she was a bad wife and mother. Her son didn't talk very well, was always scared. She didn't know how to keep him occupied. She pitied him, loved him in her own way. But still, Johnny weighed her down. Her maternal instincts had not awakened. She wanted to sleep till dinner time and live at her own pleasure. But the child took up a lot of her time and energy. Mostly she shifted all maternal duties to the nanny Claire, and it was a disaster for her when she took a day off. The woman remembered how caring and tender Ryan had been right after the wedding, how he had met her from the maternity hospital with a huge bouquet of flowers and balloons, how he had promised to always be there for her. At first he was. But as soon as Daddy got sick, her husband immediately put Papa John's into hospice care. Even though Emily was against it, and Ryan had changed a lot, raising his voice at her, snapping at the baby, spending all his time at work and in restaurants with his friends. Their marriage was falling apart, and Emily began to realize that her husband never loved her, just played this role for the sake of career and money, position in society, and that made the woman so bitter, so bad. After all, before she was the first beauty, herself rejected the Cavaliers, and now her own husband does not put in anything, wipes his feet on her. The day passed drearily. The child was capricious, did not want to eat, refused to sleep during the day. Emily was very nervous about this and decided to go out. Sonny, she called Johnny. Let's go for a walk. There are lots of kids out there. In the park, at least you can run around and eat properly. Trouble with you, son. No peace, she sighed. Emily put the boy in the child's seat and got behind the wheel, even though she knew she shouldn't do it after last night's scandal, and yet they drove off. The woman was excited, riskily overtaking cars. She honked. The baby was frightened and cried. Emily looked back. She was trying to calm Johnny down and flew into the oncoming lane and lost control. There was a screech of brakes, a violent impact, a child's scream in darkness. It was a terrible accident. Emily died at the scene. The child was lucky to have only abrasions and a broken arm. He was taken to the hospital, and John Johnson was having a terrible dream. Emily was sitting next to him, crying and apologizing. I'm sorry. Daddy, I'm a bad daughter. Johnny's in trouble. Help him. The man woke up, startled, hitting his head. There was no one in the room, but his heart felt uneasy. He literally felt with his skin. It was not just a dream. Tragedy had struck. John Johnson tried to call his daughter Emily, but her phone was disconnected. This had never happened before. In the morning, Ryan called him with the terrible news. Emily had been killed in a car accident. Sam is in the hospital with a fracture. It was her own fault for what happened. The businessman asked hoarsely what had happened. Ryan mumbled something, but he didn't believe it. His little girl. And Sam, who is he in the hospital with? I hope he's not alone. He's scared. He's just a little kid. Ryan, answer me. Don't be silent. You're not going to leave him now. You promised. The man replied dryly, I got a babysitter at the hospital. I made the arrangements. I'll take care of Emily's funeral. There's no point in dragging this out. I don't know what to do about Sam yet, but I'm not going to raise someone else's kid alone. Ryan hung up the phone, and Emily's father clutched his head. God, what kind of monster had he nurtured? He didn't care that his wife was dead, and he didn't care about Sam either. What had he done? No, grandson, I'm going to fix this. As long as I'm alive. I'll help you. Grandpa will fix it. John Johnson lay awake for 24 hours, grieving for his daughter and wondering how to help his grandson. He didn't even notice the pain in his back and the nausea. The man called the nurse Emily Petrovna and slipped her a note. Dove, I beg you to help. My daughter is dead. My grandson is in trouble, and I'm confined to a chair. Find Ashley Wilson at Hospital 17. I think she works in surgery. And give her this note. It's a matter of life and death for the baby. Please don't say no." The kind woman immediately nodded. "Okay, John, I'll do it. Calm down. I can see you're grieving. I'm sorry for your loss. I'll go right over during the break today. Oh, what an ordeal you've been through. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy." Emily Petrovna felt sorry for this patient and always looked after him with special care, often sighing. "That's how it is. There is plenty of money. There is a business, the age to live and live. Daughter, son-in-law, grandson, everything like people. But a man had a misfortune, a fatal disease. He became useless in his family. They brought him here, locked him up in a stuffy ward, and he lives out his life as he knows how. How terrible it is to be in such a situation. God forbid." She often looked into the blue eyes of the patient, full of pain and betrayal of loved ones, and saw in them inexpressible despair and pain. Ashley was just about to eat her lunch when the receptionist called out to her. "Here, some woman gave you a note. I don't know her. She didn't introduce herself and wouldn't wait. She said she was in a hurry. She asked me to give the note to you personally. Said it was a matter of life and death." Ashley was surprised, unfolded the note, and began to read. "I'm begging for help. Ashley, even though I have no moral right to do so, I know my daughter Emily stole your fiancé from you. I forced Ryan to marry her, which I still regret. I want you to know the truth. My grandson Sam wasn't born to Ryan, he was born to Jason Smith, Emily's dad. I lost my only beloved daughter. Grandson Sam is in the hospital, only 2 years old. I myself am terminally ill, confined to a wheelchair, living out my days in a hospice. I don't have long to live, and all I pray to God is that my grandson Sammy will be happy. But Ryan is a monster. He doesn't want someone else's baby. That's what he said. I'm sure he'll send him to an orphanage, and it makes my heart bleed. I'm powerless to help my grandson. I'm asking you for one thing. Find Jason. Let him know he's the father. I remember him being a decent guy. I hope at least he won't abandon his son. Ashley, I'm in hospice care on Garden Street. I'm hoping for your kind, compassionate hearts. Sincerely, John Johnson." Ashley was shocked. She reread the letter 3 times and, without thinking, summoned Jason from the residence room. "Even though you pretend you didn't know me before, you don't look at the past. Here you are, read it carefully, and don't try to disown the baby. It's a grief that I'm no longer here." The man went to the window, put on his glasses, sat down and read everything. He was silent for a long time. Then he called Ashley over. "We need to find out what hospital the kid is in and visit him, see if he needs any help. But first I have to talk to John Johnson myself. And I'm sorry, Ashley. I've been an idiot. I keep thinking of old grudges. I don't know how you put up with me for so long. Well, I can't figure this whole thing out without you. I promise. If the baby's mine, I won't hurt anyone and I won't give up my son." Ashley, despite all the bad news, breathed out a sigh of relief. She and Jason had finally made up. It felt so easy. Ashley held out her skinny hand for a handshake. Jason suddenly took her hand and kissed it, saying, "You're amazing, Ashley. I've never met anyone like you. Shall we go see Smith's businessman? I have a feeling it's going to be a tough meeting." John Johnson was so excited when he saw Jason and Ashley on the doorstep, he brushed away a stingy tear and began to speak. "You came after all. Thank you guys. Ashley, you were friends with Emily when you were a kid. I remember, and you know how much I loved her. After my wife died, she was my only comfort. Only I was the one who made her selfish. I saw that my daughter didn't want to study, work, or start a family, and I wanted you, Jason, to be my son-in-law. You've got that masculine side to you. You always knew what you wanted from life, and persevered to your goal, as I once did when I was young. So when my daughter told me you two broke up, I was very upset. I didn't like Ryan right away. Alphonse, he made jokes, had fun at our expense, and he was just taking advantage of the $10,000. I was hoping he and my daughter weren't serious. I thought Emily would figure it out on her own and they'd break up, but her pregnancy threw everything out of whack. Ryan immediately ran away. He kept saying he couldn't have kids and that the baby was yours. Jason, I begged my daughter to call you and tell you, but she wouldn't. She was sure you wouldn't forgive her or believe her. She was also honest about how she didn't love you. She loved Ryan. She even threatened to get rid of the baby. So I nailed that kid, forced him to marry, and put Sam on his record, put him in a company, helped him in his career. put him in a mansion, and hoped that my daughter would calm down now, get the bad thoughts out of her head and be happy. Only it didn't turn out that way. Ryan felt like the master of his life and changed a lot. He and Emily fought all the time. She cried a lot, even started drinking. And the most disgusting thing is that neither my son-in-law nor my own daughter could ever really love the child. Each defended their own interests and ambitions, and the baby had nothing to do. While I was healthy, I often took Sam to myself. I felt sorry for him. But then I got sick myself. Doctors said he didn't have long to live. My legs, my ears were failing. I thought my daughter would be by my side, my son-in-law would not leave me in trouble, because I had done so much for them. But I was wrong. Ryan had me shipped right back here, and my daughter didn't put up much of a fight. Okay, Daddy, you'll get good care and treatment there. But I have a little kid. You know, it's a hassle, and I wanted to howl. I couldn't believe that no one needed me anymore. And when I heard about Emily's death, it was like my life had stopped. Now I want to die so I can be close to her in heaven. But it's Sam I'm worried about. Ryan's not his father. He's never had any warm feelings for him. And now he's saying he doesn't want someone else's kid, but he's dead wrong. I've long ago insured myself and transferred all the shares of the company to Sasha, but my son-in-law doesn't know about it yet. He's waiting for me to die. He thinks he's going to take over the company. Please, Jason, don't give up on your son. Imagine what it's like for a kid without a mother. At least they're not around. But that's not family. Jason sat there pale as a sheet. Then he said quietly, I'll find out what hospital Sasha's in tomorrow, and I'll do a genetic evaluation. Without it, I can't prove paternity in court, and if he's mine, I'll take the baby for myself. No offense, Ashley Wilson was thinking about something else. Suddenly she suggested, John Johnson, I'm on vacation from tomorrow. You can move in with me. I'm a nurse, I can give you all your shots myself. I live with my nephew Johnny. He's in high school. It'll be more fun with the three of us. I've known you since you were kids. You're not a stranger to me, and you don't deserve to be so old. But I don't hold a grudge. I listened to you and realized that maybe it was for the best that Ryan betrayed me back. Then the old man couldn't take it anymore and cried silently, wiping his tears with the sleeve of his pajamas and thanking her. Thank you, Ashley. I don't mind at all. At least I get a month with my family. I can't stand lying here counting the minutes until I die. I'm exhausted. And after talking to the businessman, Jason went looking for his son. He made inquiries, found where he had bought sweets and a nice toy, and opened the door to the room. On the bed sat on his knee the little boy, his arm in a cast. Not them, he was sternly told off. Sasha, but what did the doctor tell you? You cannot run. You have to lie down or the arm won't heal, right? And you've been spinning like a Yule log and not listening. Jason was stunned. The boy had been a carbon copy of him as a child, even left-handed, also without any expertise. The man realized that this was his own son, smiled at the kid, held out the toy. Hi, Sasha. My name is Uncle Jason. I've come for you. Let's go to Grandpa. Do you love Grandpa John? Do you miss him? The little boy clapped his hands, fussed, and began to babble. Grandpa, Grandpa, I'm going to Grandpa's house. I was even glad to see him. Well, last, you're a relative of the Smiths. At least someone visited the child, or his father's own father does not show his nose. I have a family of my own, by the way, and 2 children. Of course I feel sorry for Sashenka. It's such a grief. His mother died, but I can't live here. So you'll take the boy. Just make your own arrangements with the doctor. I don't want any trouble. And I won't give the child to you without the father's permission. I'm sorry. Ryan came almost immediately. Jason led him out into the hallway and hissed, I know Sasha is my son, and I'm taking him to his grandfather. And in fact, I'm going to prove paternity, and the baby will live with me. And don't think of standing in my way. It's not like you need the baby, Ryan admitted, and I didn't think to resent it. On the contrary, I'm glad things are working out this way. Yes, please, take him wherever you want if he's going to the other world soon, and his whole business will be mine. At last I'll start a new life. And I really don't need this kid. I never got used to him. Jason picked up the baby and drove with him to Ashley's house. The meeting between grandfather and grandson was so touching that everyone was sobbing. The baby hugged him tightly, crying then laughing. John Johnson, his cheeks are so dear, Jason whispered as he cradled his treasure. Ashley, don't you realize what a good deed you've done? I didn't want to live. I begged to die. I couldn't wait to see my grandson. We need to make this official as soon as possible, before Ryan realizes that Sasha's the only heir. Otherwise, he's going to have his hands full with the kid. Ryan decided to celebrate being free of his hated stepson and threw a party. Whiskey, dancing, and fun. He bragged to everyone. Today is the best day ever. Jason got his stepson, and it's wonderful. Let him live with him and raise him and love him. The main thing is, that obnoxious whiner is not with me now, and soon I'll own the company. What will you tell my girls? I'll think about which one of you to choose. One of the girls who worked as a secretary for the Smiths company willingly kept her nose down. Ryan, you can't be the boss of a company without a stepson. You just don't know everything. You're a fool to give away the heir to an empire. Yeah, John Johnson is 100 times smarter than you. He signed it over to him a long time ago when the baby was born. I thought you were smarter than that. The man got angry. Abruptly, he turned off the music, the mood faded, and he barked. Go away. The party's over. Let's go, father-in-law. Let's go, bitch. The next day, Ryan rushed over to Jason's house with Ashley, demanded his son. You have no right. Sam is officially my son on paper. I'm judging you all. I'm going to raise him myself. I have the right. Give me the baby. And then John Johnson came out of the bedroom in a stroller. Ryan froze. He didn't exactly expect to see him here. He thought the old man was dying. The businessman smirked. What's the holdup? You thought I'd be dead and you'd be on a horse, and you're screwed. You won't see your grandson again, and you won't see your child in company being abused like that. I've already told you, you're fired. If I'd known you were such a bastard, I wouldn't have let you in the house. 2 years ago. Get the hell out of here. Ryan walked in. I'm not saying goodbye. I'll see you in court. My papers say I'm the father. We'll fight another day, Pops. Well, that's where Ryan miscalculated. At the trial, Jason's lawyer presented the genetic test results, and paternity was admitted. And there were witnesses who saw that Ryan had abused his stepson and didn't love him at all. It was the nanny. The women really clung to the baby and realized they had to intervene. A child needs family, love, and care. And with Ryan, he's never going to get that. All this worrying, taking care of the baby, has brought Ashley and Jason so close together. They'd grown so close. They couldn't imagine life apart. And Sam was so drawn to Ashley. He desperately lacked a mother's affection and care, for he had not received it with his own mother. The woman was happy to take care of them, read him stories. All together walked in the park. John Johnson was proud in the sun, enjoyed the last warm sensations of loneliness, and thanked God that he would leave life like this, in love and happiness. But most importantly, his soul no longer ached for his grandson. He was in good hands. Jason listened to himself. It wasn't immediately that he felt like a father. At first he had been driven by impulse, by a sense of duty, by pity for a small and defenseless child. But every day he became more and more accustomed to his son, felt a special tenderness for him when he took him in his arms, and something in his soul began to change. Ashley's apartment had been cramped, and Jason had decided to move everyone into his mansion. Now there was plenty of room for everyone. Johnny had grown attached to Jason, too, and had even told him a secret. Uncle Jason, my aunt likes you. She's been in love with you for a long time. I know she has. It's just a secret. I wish we could all live together forever now. Ashley's always laughing and baking cakes now. I haven't seen her this happy in a long time. The man laughed, ruffled the boy's hair, and winked. You're right, Johnny. I'm a fool, hiding my head in the sand like an ostrich again. I know I love her, but I'm afraid to tell her. I'm waiting for something. So, conspirator, will you help me surprise Ashley? The boy nodded. He adored his aunt and wanted to please her, but it was their man's secret for the time being. Johnny wanted badly to tell Ashley again, but he held on. A deal was a deal. Jason was so mysterious that morning, he woke Ashley up and whispered, Good morning, I have a surprise for you. Get ready. I asked Claire to come. She's going to take care of the kids and John Johnson. I want you to remember this day as your happiest. It's very important to me. Ashley had no idea what Jason was up to. Her birthday wasn't for a while yet. What was the surprise? The man blindfolded her with a scarf and took her somewhere. Then they walked up the stairs for a long time. Jason held Ashley tightly so she wouldn't stumble, and finally unblindfolded her. The woman gasped. They were on the roof of a high-rise building. The view of the city was stunning, breathtaking. The man pulled a red velvet box, a bottle of champagne, fruit from his briefcase, and said solemnly, I was a fool, for I liked you at once when we studied together. And then when we began to work together, I was tormented. I already loved you, but I was angry with myself and could not admit it. And now that we are practically living as one family, I want to tell you, marry me. I love you, honey. We'll raise our children together and just live for each other." Ashley couldn't believe it. Was she really hearing the most cherished words of her life? She waited. Ashley immediately wrapped her arms around Jason and kissed him greedily, hotly, passionately. And of course, Emily arrived home to find her husband's mistress standing in front of her. And when she held out the document, "What a lovely day today," Emily exclaimed, putting on the table a sumptuous dish of roast duck. "I'm so glad we decided to have lunch with your brother today," Susan said, looking around the table and realizing that everything was in place. She clapped her hands together in satisfaction. A satisfied smile appeared on her face. Her dear, beloved husband John came over to her, put his arm around her waist and pulled her close. Emily felt a pleasant warmth on her back, turned around to face him and kissed him on the lips. It had been a full 3 years since they had known each other, and a full 5 months since their wedding day. Emily adored her husband, considered him the closest thing she had to a man. He was well-built, handsome, intelligent, the kind of man one could never find. Emily considered herself lucky. John's hands moved lower, gripping her thighs tighter. "Honey, not now. We have guests coming over," she said, laughing. John was still holding her in his arms, trying to reach her warm neck with his moist, cool lips. Emily kept dodging and laughing, enjoying the sudden game. But then the doorbell rang. Emily opened the door in front of her guests and saw her brother John on the doorstep. "This is Ashley." He introduced his girlfriend. Emily took a quick glance at the attractive woman with slender legs and a bushy mop of black hair. She was petite and fragile. The gray eyes and thin lips on her pale face spoke of a sensitive nature. "Nice to meet you. Come in," she said. Soon John appeared. He greeted the guests, shook his brother's hand, and glanced at Ashley, sizing her up. He kept his emotions to himself. "Let's get to the table," Emily broke the silence. "How did you two meet?" She cut off a piece of duck. The meat was very tender, sent a small piece into her mouth, and then looked up at Ashley, wanting to hear the story of their acquaintance. The girl was a little confused, taking a napkin to wet her lips. Michael beat her to it. Taking a sip of wine, he began to tell the story of their first meeting. Ashley was giving a seminar at our hospital. A very interesting topic, by the way. He picked up a golden potato with his fork. The effects of drugs on the human body. Emily raised her eyebrows, surprised at the topic his girlfriend had chosen. "Are you a medical professional too?" "I graduated from medical school," Ashley explained, lowering her gaze to her plate. After a second, she glanced at John, who kept his gaze on her. He was sitting diagonally, acting like an observer studying the object that caught his eye. "Did you know?" Emily interrogated her husband. The man, not understanding what she was talking about, interrogated his wife again. It turned out that John had fallen out of the conversation a little, immersed in thought. "Oh my. I did not know that the usual drugs can be real killers. It sounds fantastic." She was genuinely surprised. "Are you planning to get married?" "All you need to know," Michael replied cheerfully. Emily glanced over at Ashley. She replied that they were thinking about it. After a hearty dinner, it was time for hot tea and sweet dessert. "Be careful. There's a risk of swallowing your tongue, because this pie is so good," Emily said as she set a gorgeous strawberry pie with whipped cream on the table. "Did you make it yourself?" Michael wondered. "I got it from the bakery around the corner," she joked. The audience supported her with laughter. "Next week I'm going on a business trip to Germany," John's brother said. He explained that he was being sent on a training course, a long-time dream. There is nothing better than sharing experiences. His brother and his wife supported him. They congratulated Michael on this pleasant news. The dinner came to an end, and the guests, thanking for their hospitality, went home. "But do you think they'll make it?" Emily asked her husband John while putting the dishes in the dishwasher. He replied that they probably would, because they love each other, and you can see it on their faces. Emily finished cleaning up the kitchen, then wrapped her arms around John's neck and pressed herself against him. "I missed you so much," she said, kissing him on the lips. He kissed her back. They snuggled into each other, wrapping each other in an embrace. They walked through the hallway, ending up in a dark room. The deeper they went into it, the more the darkness engulfed them, hiding their silhouettes from view. Deep breathing was heard, the rustle of clothing. Emily was cleaning the house one day, checking the dust and putting things in their places. In the background, the television was playing a program about traveling. Suddenly, it stopped abruptly. There was a breaking news broadcast. The television announced that Flight RU-295 New York-Los Angeles had to make an unscheduled landing in Denver, the newscasters said. Emily knew that Michael was supposed to be on that flight. She immediately called her husband, telling him about it. John replied that he would call his brother back and find out what had happened. But after dialing his number, John heard only short beeps. A little while later, he got a call from Ashley. "Hello, John, hi. Did you call?" "Yes, Ashley, hi. I wanted to know what flight Michael was on." Emily said there was an emergency landing on TV on a flight to Los Angeles. "What? Emergency landing? What was the flight number?" the girl asked. John called out the numbers, and then Ashley breathed a sigh of relief. No. Luckily, Michael has a completely different flight number and he's fine. Don't worry. I just finished talking to him," she replied convincingly. John was in no hurry to end the conversation. "Was there anything else?" Ashley asked. "No, I think it's all clear now," John replied and reluctantly said goodbye. In the evening, he returned home as usual. Emily was waiting for him there. She was happy to see her beloved husband again, asked about his mood, sat down at the table, poured tea into mugs. But suddenly she felt sick. It had happened to her before, and she knew it would pass soon. The thing was that Emily suffered from anemia, which was not well treated. She took daily vitamins to keep her healthy, but it had little effect on her daily life, except now. Only her doctor had warned her that with such a condition, she was unlikely to be able to bear and deliver a child. It made Emily sad, and she often brought it up, fearing that perhaps John wanted children, but with her around, it was unlikely he would ever be able to realize it. "Is everything all right?" John asked, gently holding his wife under her elbow and around her waist. A little more, and Emily stopped feeling dizzy. "We should see another doctor," John suggested. Emily carefully lowered herself onto the cushioned seat. "How long have you been seeing him?" "There's no improvement, and I think it's the opposite," her husband said. "Well, don't say that. Dr. Valerie's a very good specialist," Emily said, and started dinner. John decided not to argue with her, knowing that Emily herself was very careful about her health. After dinner, the couple went to bed. The next day after work, John left the office, headed to his car, walking, trying to find the keys in his pocket as he walked. By chance, he noticed a familiar figure to his right. He stopped his gaze briefly and suddenly saw Ashley standing in front of him. She was leaning over the open hood, obviously trying to find the cause of the malfunction. John couldn't pass by without helping her figure it out. He went over to her and leaned over the hood. "I don't understand what's wrong here," she asked rhetorically, placing her right hand on her hip. She knew someone had approached her, but looked up in surprise and exclaimed, "Ah, John, how timely you are here," he answered, deliberately lingering his gaze on her eyes. "I always show up at the right place at the right time." John then turned his attention back to the car and concluded that the car repairman was needed. Ashley sighed regretfully. "Don't worry, I'll take you where you need to go," John said, easing Ashley's plight. "Oh, I'd appreciate that," she said, tucking a strand of black hair behind her ear. John opened the door to his car and Ashley sat down happily. They drove in almost complete silence, occasionally exchanging a few words. John asked how Michael, who was now in Berlin, was doing. Ashley replied that he was happy to be there, that he was doing well, and that he was glad that he hadn't turned down the offer. "I am very happy for him. I remember Michael always dreamed of being a doctor since he was a kid. And it looks like it's coming true," John concluded, glancing at Ashley. Soon they were in the driveway of the house. Ashley was carrying a heavy bag and John offered to help her carry it upstairs. She agreed. A few minutes later they were in a small but cozy apartment. Michael had purchased it a year ago, taking off his high-heeled shoes. Ashley walked to the kitchen and offered John something to drink. Without hearing his response, she pulled out 2 glasses and splashed some whiskey. John was a little discouraged by what was happening, because he wasn't going to stay long. But he couldn't refuse such a beautiful girl either. At that moment, Ashley was wearing a beige dress with black stripes that emphasized her slim figure. She went to the window, opened it, and then took out a cigarette and smoked. John had no idea that she could act so relaxed in company with Michael. She always gave the impression of a nice and proper girl. John stared at her, and at the orange flame that grew stronger with each new puff of Ashley's smoke. There was a fire burning inside John that he didn't want to let go. The girl inhaled the thick stream of smoke eagerly, opening her sensual lips slightly. Her languid gaze made John question his ability to keep his composure. This attractive, delicate girl with white skin, graceful neck, beautiful shoulders and hips seemed the epitome of defiance. John walked over to the table, picked up his glass and took a small sip. Ashley offered him a smoke as well. Everything happened in silence, as if they were both enjoying the atmosphere. John took the cigarette from her hands with his index finger and thumb and brought it to his lips. He did something he didn't usually do. He covered his mouth and let the smoke drift away, without taking his eyes off the girl. And John himself didn't notice that he was already kissing her. It was a blur, a fleeting loss of judgment. But what a sweet moment it was, full of feeling and passion. If it hadn't been for the phone call, John would hardly have been able to come to his senses. It was his wife, Emily. She was already waiting for her husband at home, and told him that dinner had long since gone cold. "Don't worry, darling, I'll be there soon. I had to stay late for work. I've been so busy, I forgot to call you," John said, looking at Ashley. She lifted the corners of her lips slightly. John found her smile charming, and he smiled back. "I'm on my way." "Kisses," he said, and then he hung up the phone, still looking at Ashley, realizing that he didn't want to break up with her at all. But if he did, he wasn't doing right by his wife. Just before he left the apartment, he stopped for a moment and looked at the girl who had stirred new feelings inside of him today. He knew that he should not continue with what had happened. So with just one last glance at the searing brunette, he walked out the door. When John returned home, his beloved wife met him here. She, as always, met him on the doorstep with a hug and a kiss. "I waited for you. Today you were delayed, not on a joke," she said. She looked tired. John answered her with the usual phrase, and then went into the kitchen, put some food on his plate, and sat down at the table. Emily was telling him about the day before, but John's thoughts were now directed in a completely different direction. He put his fork to his mouth, but he couldn't help but think about Ashley. She seemed so mysterious, so alluring and mysterious. He wanted to keep being around her, to unravel what lurked behind her appearance. He couldn't get rid of the image in front of his eyes, namely her gray eyes, lined with black pencil, her long eyelashes and her open mouth. "John, are you here?" Emily interrogated him when she didn't get an answer to her question. Did you ask something? As if waking up, said her husband. What did you do at work today? Emily asked the question again. John shrugged his shoulders slightly, tilted his head to the left, and began to make up as he went along the flurry of activity he'd supposedly pulled off after hours. Emily stared at him, then yawned, blinking her eyes a few times and wiping away a tear. I'm so sleepy already, she said. Go to bed. Then John told her. I want to wait for you, Emily said, resting her blonde head on his shoulder. At last they went to bed, and Emily complained to her husband again about her dizziness, then fell asleep. John, on the other hand, couldn't sleep for a long time. The next day, when he was at work, Emily called him and told him that she had been taken to the hospital. He jumped out of his chair in surprise. What happened? Are you all right? He asked. I don't know. I passed out in the cafe and woke up in the hospital, Emily explained. Honey, I'm on my way right now, John said, and leaving all his work and ordering his secretary to write down everything important, he went straight to the hospital. That day, Emily decided to meet an old friend at a cafe. Everything was fine at first. They were talking nicely, sharing things with each other. But at one point, Emily suddenly felt short of breath. She decided to get up to ask the waiter to turn on the air conditioner. But as soon as she did, her legs gave out and she collapsed to the floor. Her friend rushed to her, and the cafe staff called an ambulance. John paced the hallway in boredom. A nurse ran into him. Calm down, man, answered him a girl whose low voice did not match her fragile appearance. Your wife is fine. Ward 5. Come in, please, the nurse said, pointing to the door with her right hand. John literally flew in. Emily was lying there, covered by a sheet. When John saw her, he rushed to her bedside, knelt down, and took her palm in his hands. Emily, my sweet love, how glad I am that you are well. When you called me, I was so frightened, said the husband, covering his wife's palms with kisses, pressing against her chest, looking into her eyes. It's all over now. My good man, everything is over, she said, and closed her eyes. Tears came to her eyes. Why are you crying? John asked her. I lost the baby, Emily whispered. She squeezed her eyes shut even tighter, trying to hold back the tears, but she couldn't and burst into tears. What are you talking about? John said, not believing his ears. He soothed his wife, stroking her shoulders and back. 5 days later, Emily was discharged home. The doctor recommended regular vitamin intake as well as scheduled IVs to keep her healthy. He also asked for bed rest and no excessive stress on the body. Emily was a little upset about her condition and the fact that she had to lead a sedentary lifestyle. Despite this, she took regular walks in the park and tried to be outdoors more. Sometimes when John had a free moment, he would join her. Together they strolled leisurely along the narrow paths, admiring the perfect lawn and the view of the waterfront. Suddenly, John happened to see Ashley on his left. He was very happy to see her, but had to restrain himself and his wife's. Ashley stepped closer to them, and Emily greeted her. Strangely enough, she acted perfectly calm, as if there was nothing between her and John at all. The man even thought for a moment that he might have been taking something too seriously that wasn't really worth worrying about at all. How are you doing? Tell me, how's Michael? Emily asked. Ashley was eager to talk about what was going on, about her life. Michael is doing well. He's learning. He's getting new knowledge. He likes everything. He promised to send me a picture, but he can't send it. He says he has no time, she said through laughter. Well done, boy. It's always been his dream, said Emily. I'm happy for him, too, Ashley said. Then she turned her gaze to John and looked him straight in the eye. He felt like she was seducing him right now with her pretty face. He felt his cheeks begin to burn. and he glanced furtively at Emily's wife. He tried to see if she suspected anything, but all his fears were in vain. Emily had her full attention on Ashley, who was a breath of fresh air to her. Yes, she lacked female companionship, and she needed the support of a woman. She even suggested to Ashley that they get together sometime to sit in a cafe. She said she'd be glad to, but she'd have to pick a free day. They talked for a while, and then Ashley said she had to go. John and Emily headed home as well. Evening had fallen. A cool air was descending on the town. It was pleasantly soothing and drowsy, making them want to go home and crawl under the warm blankets. That night, John couldn't sleep again. Thoughts of this girl, who was much braver than he had thought, would not leave him. The next day, when his workday was over and he was heading to his car, he heard a familiar hello. John stopped, looked in the direction the voice had come from, and was pleasantly surprised. But it really was Ashley in front of him. She was standing, leaning against her car. She was, as she always was, in a frilly pantsuit, slacks, and a blazer with a low-cut tank top underneath. She looked stylish and eye-catching. John looked around to make sure no one could see him. Then he slowly approached the girl, stood in front of her, and looked at her sharp chin, which she lifted up at that moment, presenting her thin, smooth neck to him. John was ready to put his lips to her soft skin right now, but he held himself back on purpose, realizing that it wasn't the right thing to do. "Should I give you a ride?" she asked, knowing the answer in advance. "I'd be willing to go to the end of the world with a nice driver," John answered her. The scent of her perfume reached his nostrils, and he reached for it. He almost touched her cheek, but Ashley dodged him. "Jump in the car, baby," she said rather defiantly. It made her future traveling companion even more excited. John was fully aware that his beloved wife was waiting for him at home. But he was drawn to this woman like a magnet. He literally couldn't help himself. She was truly full of life, full of passion and feelings that make us live and feel that we are alive. John didn't want to think about anything else that day. He wanted to savor the moment. He and Ashley went to the waterfront, where they spent a pleasant evening. The weather was surprisingly warm. It was wonderful to be outdoors. Ashley was having fun, laughing. Her laughter sounded so resonant, and it made John feel different from Emily, who had been feeling more and more depressed and sad lately. She took off her shoes and began to stroll down to the shore, each time gracefully drawing a line with her foot. John walked a little farther along, admiring her dance steps. Then she threw off her jacket, exposing her beautiful shoulders, and began to move them so sweetly and tantalizingly, as if she were deliberately teasing John. Finally, their walk ended, and they both ended up at the apartment where she lived with Michael. As soon as they entered, John pounced on Ashley and pinned her against the wall, running his fingers down her neck, traveling lower. Ashley waited for him to make the first move. The feelings overwhelmed them both. Trying to stop was futile. There seemed to be nothing better than the present moment. John was happy to drown in this passion, in these emotions, to inhale the scent of her skin, her hair, to touch her body and feel himself the happiest man in the world. After this encounter, filled with madness, John could no longer live as before. He began to look at his once beloved wife in a completely different way. She made breakfast and put it on the table. Emily refused to eat breakfast, citing a lack of appetite and a headache. If John had known how to help her, he would have done so. But the only thing he could do was to get his wife to see another doctor, who would get her back on her feet in no time, and they would forget about the constant apathy and lack of energy. That afternoon, John ate breakfast alone. Emily poured tea into a mug and went to her room. Her husband ate breakfast alone, but strangely enough, that's what he wanted now, to be alone with the memories of the woman who had colored his last night. After breakfast, John asked if Emily needed anything. "No, dear, thank you. I have everything." "You don't have to worry," she replied as she turned another page of the book she had spent most of her life in. The next time John met with Ashley, he unwittingly told her about what was going on in his family. She caught his pensive look and asked what was wrong. John replied that he was concerned about his wife's condition. "Yes, I've noticed too that Emily is a bit immersed in herself." "Is something troubling her?" Ashley asked so thoughtfully. Her voice was calm and gentle, and John decided to tell her everything. Ashley listened to him carefully and then said, "Yes, it's hard to live with a depressed person. Not only does he himself not know how to deal with it, he also surrounds his loved ones with the same mood." John said he himself began to feel a lack of desire to do anything. "I used to always be in a good mood, going to work, trying to do something for the family, to earn more, to fulfill the plan, or to get home faster. But now it's like I'm losing the point of it. I feel like Emily and I have become very distant from each other. So what? She's not interested in me anymore. I feel like I can't help her. The only thing I can do is find a good doctor to get her out of this state of perpetual apathy and depression." Ashley was smoking a cigarette at this time. John was sitting on the edge of the bed, his legs covered by the blanket. Ashley lowered herself to the floor and held out the cigarette to him. Emily took a deep drag on the cigarette. You could hear the tobacco crackling as it burned. "You know, I have a good doctor," Ashley said in a confident voice. "He pulled my best friend out of a similar condition once. He knows what he's talking about." Her confident tone cheered John up a little. He even felt a little relieved at the thought of being able to help Emily. "I'll talk to him, and then I'll let you know when you and Emily can come see him," the brunette said, and took another drag on her cigarette. John looked at Ashley and envied his brother a little, because he had gotten the girl. When the husband got home, he talked to his wife about the new doctor. "He's been praised and recommended," he said. Emily sat on a kitchen chair. John stood behind her, telling her about the doctor and the treatment that was sure to help her. He massaged her neck and shoulders with his large warm hands. After some thought, Emily agreed. She too wanted to return to a full life and improve her health. At the doctor's appointment, the middle-aged man asked a few questions. "Tell me, how long have you been having negative thoughts?" he asked. Emily sat in the chair, looking around the walls of the office, her gaze resting on a shelf of books. The office was spacious and bright. On William's doctor's desk were a row of elephant figurines, all with their trunks up. Emily counted 9 elephants, all of them different. "Why elephants?" Emily asked instead of answering. That confused the doctor a little. "Well, elephants bring happiness," was the first thing that came to his mind. After a moment's hesitation, he said, "Let us return to the subject of our conversation. I need to understand your condition so that I can give you the right treatment." Emily exhaled and began to tell him about the first signs of her ailment. The doctor listened attentively, making notes in his notebook. Emily watched him as she continued her story. William finally drew some conclusions for himself and then invited John into his office. He explained to both of them what tests needed to be taken. Emily felt overwhelmed. When she and her husband stepped out into the hallway, she turned to him. "Honey, I don't think we should do this. My doctor is doing fine, he knows me well." She was used to her doctor and didn't want to work with a new person. But her husband insisted, saying it would be for her own good. After some hesitation, she agreed. John put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close to him. She smiled back at him and reached up to kiss him. John was very glad that they did see a doctor and his wife agreed to be treated by another specialist. When the test results came back, John visited the doctor's office again, and the doctor gave him the medication that Emily was to take on a specific schedule. "Tell me, when can we expect to see improvement?" John asked. The doctor answered ambiguously and vaguely, saying that every body was different, and it would take time to know how fast the healing process would take place. John shook the doctor's hand, thanking him, and walked out the door. Emily greeted him with a smile. When he got home, she stood wrapped in blankets. She had spent the whole day in bed. "You can put the kettle on and sit down at the table. I ordered your favorite sushi," her husband said in an upbeat mood. "Oh, by the way, I went to the doctor today. He handed over your medication." Emily walked lazily into the kitchen. She had a bit of a headache. "Of course, since you've been in bed all day. Tomorrow your new treatment will begin. I'm sure it'll work out this time, honey," John said as he came out of the bathroom. Emily tried to stay in a good mood, even though she had been experiencing a lingering dull ache in her abdomen since morning. She decided not to tell her husband about it, so that she wouldn't upset him and start whining about her aches and pains. She sat down at the table. Soft, voluminous blanket enveloped the girl like a dense foam. She looked very cute in that outfit. Open-shouldered outfits suited her perfectly. Oh my gosh. Emily used to be cheerful, joyful, always full of life. John remembered the first time they'd met, when Emily had looked so confused, so defenseless, and that made her even more attractive. But now, when John looked at his wife, he didn't recognize her at all. The once cheerful person had turned into a creature with sad eyes that was impossible to look at without pity. John picked up one roll with his chopsticks and held it out to Emily. She laughed, but ate it. Their modest family dinner passed in silence, and then they went to bed. John thought about Ashley. It would be nice to meet her. How is she doing now? Michael should be here soon. Something's holding her up. Maybe it's for the best. John looked at his wife. She was lying on her back with her head turned to the left, sleeping soundly. John ran his hand over her shoulder, then turned to his right side and fell asleep. It wasn't long after Emily had started her new treatment, but strangely enough, she only got worse. She reported it to her husband. He was upset. They put his wife in the hospital. "I'm so worried that something might happen to her," John said when he met up with Ashley again. He was standing by the window. Ashley stepped closer, ran her palm along the line of his jacket, shook off the non-existent dust, and stared directly at his lips. "Understand, you're doing everything you can to help your wife. It's not like you can jump over your head. No one can. It's impossible," she said in a gentle, clear voice. "So stop torturing yourself in vain and let yourself rest after all." She looked into John's eyes, and he believed her, pressed his lips to hers, felt the tenderness of her lips, and sank as if in weightlessness. Ashley pulled off his jacket and slowly began to undo the buttons of his shirt. "You need to relax, trust me," she whispered. It seemed to John that Ashley was right, and there was nothing wrong with him spending another night with her. After all, Ashley had helped him, supported him through everything. Even found his wife's doctor. And John liked her as a woman. He couldn't stop her embrace, and he didn't want to. He wrapped his arms around her thighs, squeezed them tightly. Soon he didn't notice how he fell in love with this girl. He kept thinking about his brother, who was still abroad and didn't seem to be in any hurry to return. But John was only too glad for that. As long as Michael was in Germany, he could still go out with Ashley. One morning the man was getting ready for work. He was already running a little late, hurriedly tying his tie as he went. He'd had a little coffee, almost burned himself. Lately he'd been making his own breakfast, since Emily was still in bed indulging in sleep. John entered the room to say goodbye to her before leaving for work. But when he entered, he found his wife lying on the bed. Her right arm was down on the floor. She was lying in a rather unfamiliar position. Suddenly, John was overcome with panic. He was afraid that perhaps Emily wasn't well. And he was right. He ran over to her and checked her pulse first, slapping her cheeks, trying to bring her to her senses. John's whole body shook with fear. He rushed to the phone and dialed Ashley's number. "Stop being hysterical," she said in a voice that had a distinctly steely edge to it. "If she has a pulse, she's alive. I'll call an ambulance to take her back to the hospital. Calm down, I'm coming to you," she said, and then hung up. Ashley's eyes flashed with an evil light. She arrived at John's house very quickly indeed. The ambulance arrived at the same time. Emily was placed on a stretcher and taken to the hospital. Ashley walked over to John and looked into his eyes. "You don't have to be afraid of anything. It's going to be okay," she said so insistently and so confidently, wrapping her arms around John's face. There was fear in his eyes. "The doctors are doing everything they can." "I love you," the brunette added so suddenly that John didn't even know what to say to her. He was grateful to this girl for being there for him and helping him in every way possible. His breathing became more rapid. He was also staring into Ashley's gray eyes, which were literally penetrating him. "I love you, too," he said. Ashley's expression became emotional. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her lips stretched into a smile, and her whole face lit up with a strange light, completely baffling John. It was as if he didn't realize what he just said, or how his words had affected Ashley. She nestled her lips against his again. She did it as if they were the only two people in the world. "Let's go to the hospital and check in, and then we'll go to my place," she said. John agreed with her. They arrived at the hospital and asked the doctor about Emily's condition. They received a disappointing answer. William George said that Emily's illness had taken on a new form, and her condition had become more complicated. John wrapped his arms around his head. He didn't want to believe what the doctor was telling him. He was depressed. Words could not describe how he felt right now. John got up from his seat, walked out into the hallway, and began to walk from side to side, biting his fist. He did not want to accept the current state of affairs, because the treatment proposed by the doctor was supposed to improve his wife's condition. But in the end, the opposite had happened. And John felt guilty. He had insisted that Emily try the new treatment. Ashley's eyes were desperate and bewildered. John took her hands in his. "Wait, that's not what I was going to say at all," he said, fearing to see the distress on Ashley's face. "But that's exactly what you're saying. You're saying you love your wife and regret getting involved with me. You're willing to abandon me when I need your support the most. God, how am I supposed to get through this?" Having said that, Ashley tried to go upstairs, but John held her back. "What are you talking about?" he interjected. His emotions went from self-recrimination to Ashley's depressed state. "Michael," she said barely audibly, putting a hand to her lips. "What's wrong with him?" John interjected with a frown. "I was going to tell you later, but what does it matter now? I got a call from the emergency services yesterday that Michael was missing," she said, turning toward the window. John lit a cigarette, probably trying to calm himself down. He too rose from his chair and hesitantly wanted to approach her, but stopped halfway. "Wait, but how did this happen? I mean, you said he was fine, and you talked on the phone regularly." He looked at her slender figure, clad in the black lace cardigan that suited her so well. "Yes, that's right. We've talked often, but there's been no messages from him in the last few days. I got worried, but I had no contacts to find out what was wrong with him. So I called the search service, through their channels. They found out that a certain Michael Alexandrovich had disappeared without a trace. That sounds strange. Where could he have disappeared to?" John asked. Ashley, standing with her back to him and looking at her reflection in the window, took a deep drag on her cigarette smoke. "It's awful," she said in a shaky voice ready to turn to crying. John came over and put his arm around her. "But why didn't you tell me about it right away? The more time passes, the harder it is to find a person." He waited for a response. Ashley took her time answering. She smoked quietly, put out her cigarette, then turned to John. "I had too much on my plate at one point. I wasn't just thinking about myself, I was thinking about how to help his wife. I tried to handle it on my own, especially since you have your own worries. Your wife needs help, too. You didn't immediately hire a good doctor for her, did you?" Her voice took on a steely tone. It slightly confused and stunned John. He didn't understand what Ashley was getting at. "You know, I've been doing everything I can to make my wife better. But God knows, things took a different turn." John began to make excuses. Ashley decided to stop talking this time. Walking over to him, she put her arms around him. "You're all I have left," she said. John was overcome with guilt again. He realized that he had no right to leave Ashley alone right now. They spent that night together, comforting each other. The next day, after waiting for John to leave for work, Ashley went to run some errands. Before going out, she took a bath and picked out her clothes. She put on a beige suit, which looked stylish and not too revealing, and completed the look with earrings, a chain, and her favorite perfume. After assessing her reflection in the mirror, she left the apartment. Ashley knew exactly where she was going. Her cab stopped outside the hospital. She walked confidently toward the main entrance. Ashley didn't come here to see Emily. Almost at the end of the hallway, she turned right and opened a door with a sign that read Chief Medical Officer William George. "Oh, you, my dear. It's good to see you," he said, rising from his chair. It seemed he and Ashley had been acquainted for a long time and knew each other quite well. They exchanged welcoming kisses. "You look lovely as always," the doctor commented on his guest's appearance. "I came to tell you that it's time for us to speed up the process. Don't you think so?" she asked the doctor. He spat in his chair, put his foot on his leg, and put his hands on the armrests. Definitely felt like a king. "Yeah, what do you suggest?" William George said playfully, taking out 2 small glasses and a bottle of white wine from the minibar. He poured just a little into the glasses and held one out to Ashley. "Let's at least drink to our meeting. It's so rare to see you anymore. I miss these moments," he said. Ashley looked at him and took a deep breath without answering. She remembered how he'd picked her up on the street when she was very young, given her shelter and food. Never tried to keep her close to him, but Ashley realized herself that she needed to stay close to him now. And only when she felt her own strength, expressed her desire to live independently and separately from him, she rented her own apartment and began to live again. Except she didn't know how to live any other way. Thanks to William George, she learned to seduce men, to fall in love with them, and then, having obtained the desired result, to part with them coldly and ruthlessly. The worst of it was that this man could give her everything but true love. Ashley, who had lived with him for 4 years, could not get rid of her consumerist attitude toward men. And now that she was on her own, she'd met them time after time and used them. They were all different, each good in his own way, young, interesting, promising, just the kind of men this girl needed. She got to know them, fell in love with them, took what interested her, and then parted. This went on countless times, and there was no way this girl could stop. She did not know how to live differently, because she knew how to behave with the opposite sex only like this. Unfortunately, she was too uptight and closed to be real to them, and so she was only able to communicate with them superficially for her own benefit. Ashley was far from stupid and had caught herself thinking that more than once. But she was unable to change her behavior. It was more difficult than she had imagined. But despite this, there was always one person in her life to whom she could return at any moment, from whom she could ask for help, and who could take pity on her. That was William George, and this time she had come to ask for his help again. She needed to speed things up, for she could not wait long enough to avoid arousing unnecessary suspicion. "I need your help again," Ashley said, clutching the thin-stemmed glass in her hand. "What are you talking about?" the doctor asked her again. "You know what I mean," she replied. "You must remember that I am always ready to help you, because you are like a daughter to me," he said. He walked around the table, sat down on the countertop, and then, facing Ashley at a very close distance, allowed himself to cup her chin. This man loved to feel power over others, and especially this girl. William reached forward, wanting to touch her lips. "Give me what I ask of you first," Ashley replied, pulling his hand away. He looked at her for a moment, then stood up, walked over to the safe, opened it with a small key, and took out a tiny bottle. "Here you go, and don't forget your precautions," he said, sitting down on the edge of the table again and folding his hands on his knee. It was like he was waiting for Ashley to go a little softer on him, but she kept her distance. And they both felt it. When Ashley got home that evening, John was already here, having made them both a light dinner, and was glad to have Ashley to keep him company. She asked how his day at work had gone. John replied that things were holding steady. When both of them had satisfied their hunger, they were still in the kitchen talking about their various chores. "I brought some medicine. You should give it to Emily," she mumbled, immediately handing John a small vial. "What is it?" he asked. "Believe me, the glass contains something that will help your wife," Ashley said. "Where did you get it?" he asked again. "Honey, it's not that important anymore. What's important is that we have something we can do for your wife," she said, not wanting to go into details. Ashley's words always had a surprising effect on John. Maybe it was the effect of falling in love. The day John had come to visit Emily, he'd done everything Ashley had told him to do. He piously believed that Ashley wished nothing but the best for him and his family. Pouring water into a glass, he opened the vial and poured its contents into the water. Emily's appearance left a lot to be desired. She was pale, her cheeks sunken. When she saw John, she tried to smile. Her lips were pale, chapped. "Emily, you need to drink this," John said. "The doctor said it would help you keep your body strong." "Thank you for your concern," she said in a weak voice. Her husband helped her up so she could take the medicine. Emily emptied the glass and looked into her husband's eyes again. She was sorry he had to see her in this condition. "Don't worry, I'll get better soon, and everything will be fine," she said. John ran his palm over her cheek. He was looking at his wife as if she were a different person now. "You're going to be all right," he said. Even though he said so, he could hardly believe it. For too long the doctors had been trying to cure her. But all their efforts were in vain. The disease had no intention of leaving its new home. Yes, John had lied. But what else could he tell her in this situation? A few days later, Emily got worse. The doctors were very tight-lipped, and one day they informed John that they had to transfer Emily to a hospice unit. He was shocked by the news. As always, Ashley was by his side, putting her hand on his shoulder. Both of them returned home. John was heartbroken. He didn't want his wife to end her life by passing away in the prime of life from some unknown disease. Ashley found something to say to him again. She talked and told him not to blame himself for anything, that he shouldn't forget about himself and his life as it was. "You are young, you are handsome, you are full of vigor. You can't put an end to your life," she said. John sat on the couch, putting his elbows on his knees and covering his face with his palms. "You don't have to put your hands down. You're not alone. You know you have me," she said, spreading his arms. Ashley climbed into his lap, wrapped her arms around his face, and looked into his eyes. "You don't have to give up. Do you hear me? And I'll always be there for you," she said, and then nestled her lips against his. How did she do it? It remains a mystery. But as time went on, Emily stayed in the hospice. There she received the care she needed, no longer hoping for her recovery. Meanwhile, Ashley moved in with John. She was already feeling like a full-fledged mistress, and was thinking about what kind of renovations she wanted to make to her room, and telling John what kind of kitchen she wanted to replace her old one. He saw Ashley's happy eyes, and it seemed to him that this was the way it should be. Soon she started talking about getting married. More and more changes were happening in John's life. He couldn't figure out if he was going in the right direction. Ashley, on the other hand, was persistent. Unlike him, she knew exactly what she wanted. Once, while John was watching TV on the couch, she sat next to him and stroked his hands. John responded by stroking her hands. Finally, when Ashley had his attention, she said, looking at the ring finger of her hand, "How nice an engagement ring would look here. Don't you think so?" she asked, looking at John. "Yes, any jewelry would look lovely on your beautiful, delicate hands," John pointed out. "No, you don't understand. I want a wedding band," Ashley said flatly. "Are you serious?" John clarified. "What do you think? You and I have been living together under the same roof for so long, and you still wonder if we're serious about each other?" Ashley asked him. "Well, yeah, I agree with you, you're right. But how can we get married when my wife thinks I'm still in love with her?" John suddenly objected. Ashley looked at him reproachfully. "How can you say that? Look, you're not only hurting your feelings right now, you're hurting mine too. I'm living with you. I'm hoping for something, making plans, dreaming about our children. Life goes on. I'm not getting any younger. Are you ready to wait and stall for time? You've upset me too." "I didn't expect this from you," Ashley said. "I was sure that you really loved me and that you were ready to start a family with me. But then all of our meetings and hugs and kisses weren't real. Was it?" At that question, Ashley jumped to her feet and looked at John as if he'd just betrayed her. "I guess you're saying that you never loved me, and everything that happened between us was just a lie, a pathetic game you made up. Tell me the truth," Ashley screamed. "Are you really crazy?" "No, not at all," John said, trying to even things out. "Why would you think that? Calm down, please. I'm not with you for a game, believe me, really. I really like you. I have feelings for you. And of course I'd like to marry you." "Oh, for God's sake. Marry me," John suddenly said, getting down on one knee and taking out the ring he wanted to give her for her birthday. "I'm sorry I wanted to do this a little later, but I'm very happy that you're going to be my wife. I really am," he said, and in that moment he was probably sincere. After all, he wasn't going to hurt Ashley, and he was ready to take her as his wife. "Oh my God, John, this is so sudden," she suddenly exclaimed, delighted. She put her hands to her mouth like a child, as if she were afraid to frighten away the sudden happiness. "What joy. I'm so happy. At last we will be able to legalize our relationship and not hide," she said. Soon they signed and celebrated this festive celebration in a cafe with friends. Ashley was glowing with happiness. The guests congratulated the newlyweds. John felt a little awkward, but still, hearing the approving congratulations of the guests, was happy about it. "John, you're doing great. Congratulations. How is Emily?" one of his friends asked him. He replied that everything was the same with her. The groom tried to avoid these questions. After the celebration, family life settled down to a moderate pace. John was still working, visiting Emily in hospice on his free days. She rarely spoke to him and slept more and more. John, when visiting her, could not tell her that he had remarried. Before entering the room, he took off his wedding ring, which was wide and different from the ring Emily had once put on his finger. To be honest, John sighed with relief when he saw Emily asleep. In front of her, he felt a kind of shame for what he'd done. But now he was back home. Today was a day off, and Ashley was looking forward to seeing John. She had a surprise for him, and when he sat down at the table, she pulled out a small box. John looked at everything going on with interest in his eyes. "Well, don't you want to open it?" she uttered, looking intently into his eyes. He smiled and replied that of course he wanted to. He took off the top pink cardboard lid, and saw a beige napkin inside, on which was a soft bear cub the size of a small ball, and next to it a smooth paper strip. "What is it?" John wondered. He grinned and looked at Ashley again. "You and I are having a baby," she said, and stepped a little closer to John, taking his hands in hers and placing them on his lower abdomen. "Can you feel that our baby is here?" She bared her white teeth. John could hardly believe it. But it was true, and he would soon be a father. God, this was what he had dreamed of for so long. With Emily, they'd tried to have kids, but it hadn't worked out. But with Ashley put the papers in her bag, then undressed and lay in bed. Her eyes were open. She wasn't going to sleep. She waited for John to come in, but he was in no hurry. He poured the whiskey again, emptied the glass again. He was not feeling well, to say the least. It would seem, a happy new wife, a child in the future. But no peace of mind. And he knew it very well himself. He thought about his ex-wife and how she had stopped recognizing him. She'd gotten really bad. John tried to think about the present, about what he had now, but his thoughts kept coming back to Emily. While he was enjoying his new family life, she was slowly fading away, day by day. The next morning, a young doctor entered Emily's room. He was taller than average, had blonde hair and an equally blonde, close-cropped beard. He had started working at the hospice only a week ago. Before that, he had worked in a neighboring town in a polyclinic. However, writing his doctoral thesis forced him to transfer to the hospice for necessary observations. This young doctor naturally had an inquisitive mind. Moreover, he was very quick and qualitative in this direction, from which he was quickly liked by the entire medical staff. The doctor carefully examined the patient, wrote something down in his notebook. His eyes were focused. He glanced again at the patient, whose face had a horrible hue. Vaguely he recalled how they were taught what to do in cases like this. A line below it, he wrote down the tests he intended to take from this woman. I was about to leave when suddenly I heard a very soft voice. "Wait, stay with me for a while." Emily did not open her eyes, but she knew that someone was with her. She was already so weak that at times consciousness came back to her, and a great sadness and pain came over her at being here. It had been a very long time since she had seen John, but she didn't blame him for that. Realized that there was nothing he could do about her being so sick. It was only the sadness of that realization that filled her soul. "I'm here," the doctor answered. Emily struggled to open her eyes. It seemed to be the first time she had seen this face. "What is your name?" she asked. "My name is Michael George." "Michael to you," he said. "I'll need to run some new tests on you to see what's going on." "Go ahead, doctor, I don't care anymore. I already know there's only one end," she said with difficulty. The doctor did not answer her. He understood that her condition was grave, but something was definitely confusing him. And the practice he had under his belt told him that this woman might have been misdiagnosed. But when he took all the necessary biomaterials and analyzed them, his hunch was confirmed, and he immediately started the treatment according to the new scheme. And one day when he came to visit Emily, she was already waiting for him. She was still lying in bed, unable to get up. Even so, her mind was clearer. "Good morning," she greeted the doctor. He answered her in the same way. His lips turned up in a smile. "You're in a good mood, I see," he asked as he came closer. As he had all the previous days, the doctor checked her pulse and blood pressure, felt her lymph nodes, and drew blood. Emily held his gaze. "How do I know?" "Your face is very familiar to me," she said suddenly. Michael looked intently into her eyes. "Yes, that's right. I've definitely seen you somewhere before," she said, "but I can't remember where." The long stay in oblivion had weakened her memory a little. "Unfortunately, I can't help you with that. Maybe when you're feeling a little better, you can solve this riddle," Michael replied casually. Suddenly the phrase, You're asking the riddle came to Emily's mind. It had been uttered then by the blonde-haired guy in the family circle. Emily's brain went through one picture after another. Things were getting a little confusing. She tried to focus. There were young people in front of her eyes, a blonde, a brunette, and some other man. That's right. There was her husband John and that young Dr. Michael. But how did he end up there with them? Tell me, do you have any family? Maybe brothers or sisters? I remember something, but I'm not sure, Emily said. Really? What is it? Michael grinned. Emily strained again to try to recreate the picture better. But alas. I have to admit, I'm the one who had the misfortune to lose his memory, Michael said. That left Emily stunned. What do you mean, lost your memory? She questioned. Michael wanted to tell her, but at that moment a nurse entered the room and called out to him. We'll talk about this later, okay? Michael said, distracted. Yes, of course, Emily said, smiling at him. The nurse who had called Michael looked at Emily strangely and closed the door without saying anything. The nurse told Michael to go to the head doctor's office. Michael knocked on the office, and after answering, he entered. Have a seat, Michael, said the chief physician. His name was Ben Anderson. Yesterday I wanted to ask about a patient named Emily Johnson. He looked at the doctor carefully. I must say, you've made great strides. And as cynical as it sounds, I'm glad you lost your memory once. Ben laughed and prepared to listen to Michael's answer. Yes, sometimes we don't know where fate will take us, he answered. But what I'm wondering is, under what circumstances did this woman come to our hospice? Didn't the other doctors find the real cause of her illness? The strange thing is that the mobility of red blood cells, which had been reduced, became normal again, and the shape began to return to its original form. You, Ben, as a specialist with vast experience, you know that this occurs only in two cases. The first we immediately dismiss, and then we're left with the well-known clotting agent. But I don't understand your thinking, Ben Anderson interrupted him. Where are you going with this? Michael was in no hurry to answer. Something told him it was too early to say it out loud. Michael carefully monitored Emily and visited her every day. Despite the serious condition from which she had recovered and stabilized, she was still a person who loved life and had a kind heart toward people. Tell me, why doesn't anyone visit you? He once asked. When he said it, Michael regretted it. His words might have hurt her. She thought for a moment and replied that she didn't know why. I guess it's too hard for my husband to see me like this. Frankly, I've lost track of time. I can't tell you the last time he was here. Maybe a week ago, maybe a month. But I don't blame him. John was with me every day before I got here. He did everything he could to help me. I'm grateful for that. After all, if I hadn't gotten here, I wouldn't have met you, and my recovery wouldn't have begun. And yet your face looks familiar to me, she repeated, scrutinizing Michael. He squinted, as if trying to see something that had come to him. As you said, your husband's name is John? He asked, and seemed to sink further into the past, recognizing himself anew. She nodded, adding that John had a brother. After saying the last word, Emily fell silent. Finally, they looked into each other's faces. It seemed as if something important was about to be revealed, but the door to the room opened again, and Michael was urgently invited into the next room. Emily was left with the persistent feeling that she knew this man for sure and had seen him before. Eventually, she came to the conclusion that this young doctor just looked a lot like Michael, her husband's brother. Same blonde hair, and even his facial expressions were similar, but something was still different. And so far, Emily couldn't figure out exactly what it was that made her think that. On one hand, she seemed to be socializing with Michael, but on the other hand, looking at his face, he was very different from the Michael she had once known. Time went by and Emily was getting better and better each day. Emily could feel new strength literally being added to her. She could feel the blood in her veins developing throughout her body and filling it with warmth. She felt again that she could start doing something next time. When Michael came to see her, she asked him if he could purchase some thread and a hook for her. She had wanted to crochet a backpack for herself for a long time, but had put it off every time. Now she felt that she could crochet it in just a couple of days, and she wanted to make it happen. "Look, you're almost completely healthy," her doctor said. And it was true. She had even been moved to another ward because she no longer fit the parameters of a hopelessly ill person. "Don't you want to call your husband? After all, you are no longer without strength. You can talk to him about something," Michael suggested to her. But when he saw Emily's saddened look, he realized that it wasn't that simple. "I called him, but his phone was always out of range. I don't know what to think. Maybe he left town altogether," Emily said, a little confused. "Yeah, that's a little strange. How could a loving husband leave his wife in the hospital and not even be interested in her condition?" Michael asked the question aloud and regretted it again. He realized that this topic would hurt his ward. "Are you married?" Emily asked him in response. She again stumped him, because the doctor could not remember the details of his personal life. That's how memory peculiarities work. Michael remembered the names of medications perfectly and was proficient in various therapies. But simple memories from everyday life could not be uncovered. And then Michael had an idea. He asked if Emily remembered the address of the house, and Emily clearly replied that yes, of course she did. Michael then suggested that they go to her house together so that she could visit her husband and find out why he had disappeared from her sight. Emily liked the idea very much. It came as a pleasant surprise to her, and that afternoon at lunchtime they drove to the address. The car slowly parked in the yard. Emily stepped outside and looked around the high-rise building. She was a little nervous because she couldn't know in advance what to expect. Michael got out of the car and offered to go up with her, but Emily declined, saying that she could handle it on her own. He agreed. Emily slowly began to climb up the stairs. Her heart raced with each step up the stairs. When she reached the familiar door with the two numbers 2 and 7 attached to it, she pressed the bell and was ushered in. She pressed the bell and licked her lips in anticipation. She mouthed to herself several times the words she would say to her husband when she met him. All those memories and the days she'd spent with John came vividly back to her mind. She held no grudge against him, but she wanted only one thing: to see him, to talk to him about everything. There was so much she wanted to tell him. She took a breath in and out and pressed the bell, then adjusted her collar and ran her hand through her hair a couple times. Finally, footsteps were heard outside the door, and the next moment the door opened. Instead of John's expected face, Emily saw before her the girl who had been present in her memories. Emily remembered that this was John's brother's girlfriend, so she smiled at her. "Hi, can I come in?" Emily asked, and her voice sounded unsure. The lady who'd opened the door for her wasn't exactly welcoming. She gave her a scornful look and, without saying a word, wanted to close the door in Emily's face. But she had the courage to hold on to the handle. "Ashley, I don't understand you. What's going on? I can't go into my own house?" she asked again. "What do you want here?" "This is already my apartment," the new landlady shocked Emily with her words. She grinned, asking if she was joking. After all, Emily hadn't gotten anything wrong. Emily was sure this was her apartment. "Liz, you must be confused about something. It's me, Emily, John's wife. And he's home right now. I need to talk to him." Saying that, she pushed Ashley away and entered the apartment. The latter realized that she would have to make an effort before this fool would realize that she was no one else here. Emily entered the apartment, looking in every room, wanting to find John, but he was nowhere to be found. "What's going on here? Where is John?" "What's wrong with him?" demandingly asked the guest. "And that's none of your business," Ashley replied rudely. She realized she wasn't going to get rid of her that easily. But the insolent lady had a trump card in her hand. Without a second thought, Ashley went to the closet, pulled out a file folder, threw it on the table, and unfolded it in front of Emily on the right page. "Here, look, everything you wanted to know is printed in black letters in white. Read as much as you can." Saying this, she stepped back a little, crossing her arms over her chest. Emily began to cursorily study the documents with her eyes. The more she read each line, the more horrified she became by the minute. Her eyes rounded. She really didn't know what to say to that. "But how did this happen?" she asked, raising her eyes to Ashley. She silently held out her right hand in front of her. A ring sparkled on her ring finger. "That's not true. You're lying," Emily said in a raised voice, wishing it was all a lie. "I did call John, didn't I? His phone was off exactly the same as yours." Emily spoke the last words slowly, as if she just realized what was wrong. "Did you really set this whole thing up?" Emily questioned. But it was probably rhetorical. Ashley wasn't going to answer her at all. "I don't have to explain anything to you. Whatever you need, I've answered it. I've shown you the documents. Now, if you would be so kind as to leave my apartment." Ashley mumbled and walked to the door, opening it to get Emily out as quickly as possible. But as soon as she opened the door, she was immediately confronted by John. Her surprise took her breath away. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came to mind. But John, seeing his ex-wife behind her, who was standing on her own 2 feet and looking fine, was taken aback. "Emily," he said her name as if he hadn't expected it. Emily looked up at him and her eyes involuntarily began to fill with tears. John immediately took a few steps toward her, wanting to hug her, but Emily pulled back for some reason. "Emily, I'll explain everything to you. I was told you were transferred to another facility. I looked for you, but no one could figure out what I was asking of them. I can't believe it. You've recovered." He spoke the words. Emily listened to him, not knowing what to say back. As if it was too late to try to clarify anything now. "Oh God, Emily. Oh God, I'm so sorry," John was saying. Then suddenly he threw himself at her feet. Emily was completely confused. She didn't know what was happening. How could she be so abruptly left without everything? But at the same time, she couldn't see her husband, whom she still loved, suffer. "You weakling," Ashley pronounced. She did not recognize the manifestation of human feeling. She believed and was firmly convinced that it was merely a manifestation of weakness of character. Emily told John that she had tried to let him know about her health, but his phone had been off the whole time. John gave her a surprised look, because he was the one who had been calling Emily, and her phone was always busy. He immediately pulled it out and called his ex-wife again. As stated earlier, the answering machine answered. John then went into his phone settings and discovered that someone had blacklisted Emily's phone and had also set a call barring on that number. The first thing John did was turn to Ashley and gave her a questioning stare. She stood there with a nonchalant look. She masterfully kept her mask on, trying not to give herself away. "Okay, John, it doesn't make any sense now," Emily said. "You have a whole new life now, a new wife, a new family. You've even managed to sign the apartment over to her. I'm going to leave, no matter how much you cry here. It's all the same." John's long since fallen out of love with her and started a new life. "What are you talking about? I didn't rewrite anything to anyone," the man protested. Emily told him that the documents said otherwise, and then asked Ashley to show him the new property certificate again. He didn't believe her, and when he saw the folder of documents in his current wife's hands, he asked to see them. "What a fool you are," she said, grinning. This surprised John even more, who had never seen Ashley in such a role before. "Here. You can watch as long as you want, can't you?" she said mockingly. John took the folder, found the necessary documents, and indeed found there a certificate that his apartment belonged to her. Next, he found another document with his signature on it. The man remembered the day when he was drunk and Ashley had approached him asking him to sign as a trustee. She had said at the time that it was being asked for at the women's health clinic. And then it hit John. It turns out there was no baby in question. And Ashley set this whole thing up just to get a new resource. "Why don't you tell me why you did it?" John asked her. His eyes were filled with horror and indignation. Ashley was starting to get angry. She didn't like being asked to justify herself. It had been a habit ever since she'd been living with William George. He always asked her to account for herself, and often punished her severely. When she tried to lie to him, he was about to call the police to have them both thrown out the door. But at that very moment the doorbell rang, and since the door was unlocked, the guests didn't wait for their hosts to arrive. Michael appeared on the doorstep, and he wasn't alone, he was with the police. Ashley realized there was no escape. How could it be? She miscalculated. It can't be. I robbed her of her money. The ex-husband froze when he saw his rich wife on TV. In one of Jersey City's parks, children were frolicking, couples were strolling, and young mothers with strollers were relaxing after household chores. Christopher stood by a small fountain, holding a single rose. His hands were trembling with excitement. The young, handsome 20-year-old was waiting for his girlfriend Allison, who was already 20 minutes late. She can't not show up, the young man thought to himself. Christopher had been dating Allison for a couple months now, and he'd never had her late or ignore a meeting. Finally, he saw her thin silhouette in the distance. She wasn't walking, she was floating down the road. Her gait was so graceful and airy. Christopher was tired of waiting for the time to come. He walked towards her, and as soon as the girl approached, Christopher noticed that the expression on her face was sad. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I knew you had some kind of misfortune." Christopher was worried and hugged his favorite girl. Allison didn't hug him back and didn't take the flower. The girl, embarrassed, didn't want to tell the reason for her sadness. Christopher looked her straight in the eyes and asked her to keep quiet. "I'm beginning to worry," he said. "Is your grief so great that you can't even share it with me?" "My grief is you," Allison said, and looked up at Christopher. He tensed. He hadn't done her any harm, hadn't hurt her in any way. He was generally trying to do his best to make Allison happy. He asked for clarification on exactly how he could have spoiled his beloved's mood. "You're very nice, but I'm tired of walking in parks and sitting on benches," Allison said. "You've never once invited me to a restaurant, never given me anything but these roses. You realize I need a man around me, not a boy. There's no hope for you. I can't see you as my rock." "You can just say you don't want to have a relationship with a poor man," Christopher said. The boy was insulted, humiliated, and angry. Because of this, he himself was well aware that he had no money. Christopher couldn't give Allison an expensive gift, invite her even to a movie. That would undoubtedly do a lot of damage to his wallet. "How can I have money if I'm only 20? Christopher didn't understand. "We still have a long way to go. You and I are going to grow and develop together." Allison waved her head. "I don't want to wait, I don't want to grow. And I don't want to drag anyone forward," she replied. "I want a grown-up, established man." Christopher didn't seem like the kind of man who could ever accomplish anything. Her words cut him to the core. 10 years had passed since then, and he still hadn't forgotten Allison's words. He never met that girl again. How she turned out, he didn't know. But Christopher had learned that all women were only after money, and no one was interested in sincere feelings. Allison gave him a prejudice against all girls at once. Christopher could not build a serious relationship and did not even try to get close to anyone for quite a long time. By the way, there was some truth in Allison's statement. Christopher really did not aspire to a lot of money. He had misunderstood the girl. She wasn't saying that the guy was indigent and couldn't do anything in this life. She just wanted a different standard of living. She wanted to live a rich life, and Christopher could only give her an average one. She tried to explain this to him, but it was all pointless. Christopher wasn't looking for a big paycheck. He was the kind of man who believed that big money could not be earned by honest labor. So he didn't even try. He always said that rich people were either lucky or crooks. But he never thought he would fall into one of those categories, or maybe both. Christopher was already 30 years old when he met Elizabeth. He was working at a car repair shop, and an expensive car had been brought to him. It was the kind of brand their auto repair shop had never seen before. When Christopher saw the owner of the car, his jaw nearly dropped to the floor. Elizabeth noticed the surprise. She was even pleased. The young businesswoman herself offered Christopher her phone number. She didn't look at the lack of men. She could take care of herself and fulfill her own desires. And Christopher thought for the first time that with a girl like Elizabeth he could try to build something serious. Elizabeth certainly didn't seem mercantile to him in this situation. Rather, he was becoming a keeper. Of course, the man did not assume that a rich girl could consider him as a potential fiancé. But already after the first date, it was clear that Elizabeth was not looking for a one-night stand. Although she was rich, she did not have the main treasure. She was lonely. But it couldn't be said that Christopher was her last option. No, she did take an interest in the simple car mechanic. And Christopher fell in love with Elizabeth. And not just for the money. 6 months into their relationship, he and Elizabeth were married. One day the man caught himself thinking that he was the lucky man he had thought of with contempt throughout his life. The man himself did not seem to have fully realized what he loved more than Elizabeth herself, or the life she had provided for him. And Elizabeth had spared nothing for the one she loved. Christopher no longer needed to work at the auto shop. He was learning the intricacies of running a business. Elizabeth thought about giving him his own car service for their anniversary. But for now, it was just a thought. In principle, she was happy with everything as it was. She was just worried that her spouse might consider himself uncomfortable with the fact that he lived at his wife's expense. But Christopher didn't feel any inferiority. He was more than happy with everything. Elizabeth and Christopher decided to celebrate the first anniversary of their marriage alone with each other without any lavish festivities. The couple booked a table at a restaurant. Before that, they took a boat ride. It was a day just for the two of them. But their plans were not destined to materialize. Throughout the day, Elizabeth received calls from her assistant, Ben. The young man couldn't get through. First, Elizabeth hung up, and then she turned off the phone so that nothing distracted her from communicating with her husband. Ben wrote messages that went unanswered. Eventually, he found out that his boss was celebrating her anniversary at a restaurant, so she was ignoring his calls. Ben had a lot of reasons to worry, and some pretty serious ones. There was no putting off the conversation. In the middle of the evening, when Elizabeth and Christopher were about to exchange gifts, her assistant burst into the restaurant. The girl still hadn't gotten the papers for the car service she was going to present to her spouse. "Elizabeth Igorevna, we agreed with you that if I call more than 3 times, it means that there is trouble," Ben said, panting. He was obviously running to the boss with all his legs. That was why his breathing was labored. Well, what could have been so serious on Saturday, Elizabeth didn't understand. If it was really urgent, you could have written a message and then called. The assistant replied that it wasn't just urgent, it was an emergency. He offered to step aside and talk, but Elizabeth told him she had no secrets from her husband. "You're due for an inspection on Monday," Ben told her. "And it will be the kind of inspection that will find exactly what it's looking for," he added. "We've been through so many of these inspections already that it's simply impossible to intimidate me with them," Elizabeth replied with a laugh. She always used this particular form of her employee's name when she wanted to show that she considered his words to be a mere trifle. "We've been set up this time," Ben said seriously. "Your partner, with whom, let's face it, we weren't exactly working a clean scheme, has been cooperating with the police and with the IRS. He himself was recently nailed, which is why he wants to pull you out after him." Elizabeth tensed. She was starting to worry now, too. She wanted to hug Ben, to thank him for being able to find her after all. But there was no time for tenderness. She needed to find out what Elizabeth was in danger of being tested, and what she could do to avoid the consequences. Unfortunately, Elizabeth, it could get you jail time, Ben said without joy at all. And there is only one way to avoid it. Elizabeth was literally numbed by the words of her assistant. She had never expected that one of her business partners could set her up so seriously. The girl conducted her business honestly, without gray schemes and fraud. And she always trusted her partners. It turns out that it was someone's planned scheme to get her out of the game. Ben said that the person who set it all up agreed to go along with it only if Elizabeth would hand over the business to him. But she'd still have to face an audit from the IRS. How can I get out of this situation? Elizabeth didn't understand. You said there was an option, but I don't see any way out. I can't give my business to someone I don't know. Unfortunately, if you don't sign over all your assets to someone else, you'll be ruined, Ben said. Christopher sat silent the whole time. He didn't understand anything about his wife's affairs. The only thing he could realize was that she was in deep trouble. Elizabeth was crying bitterly, completely confused. Christopher stood next to his beloved and hugged her. The girl clung to his arm. But you can sign everything over to someone you trust, Ben suggested. We'll declare you bankrupt. If you don't have anything, there's nothing to take away. It's better to hand everything over to someone close to you than to an obscure character who just wants to make a profit at your expense. Elizabeth raised her tearful eyes to the assistant, looking at him as if her whole life depended on his words. She was so depressed and frightened that she was unable to think straight. Ben had caught the boss by surprise at a moment when she was as happy and relaxed as possible. The news of the impending setup had stunned her. That's what the man was counting on. At any other moment, the girl would have realized that this was some kind of divorce. But now she didn't see the illogic and inconsistency in his words. You can sign everything over to your parents or to your next of kin, Ben reasoned. Or someone you trust. Maybe someone from the company? You know very well that I have no parents, no brothers, no sisters, Elizabeth answered him. She thought Ben was alluding to himself, but he might not have counted on it because Elizabeth couldn't trust him at that moment. She continued to hold Christopher's hand and suddenly realized, I'll sign the company over to my husband now, she said. That won't arouse suspicion. But the husband is also a close relative, Ben said. Elizabeth looked at Christopher and asked him if he would be willing to take on that responsibility. Ben looked displeased. He was clearly expecting the company to go to him. Christopher didn't answer anything, just froze in one pose, as if he wanted to avoid being noticed. Either I go to prison, Elizabeth said. But if your husband doesn't want to be involved in your affairs, we can think about it, Ben added uncertainly. He agrees, Elizabeth said without looking at the assistant. Well, I guess he does, Christopher said uncertainly. It's like I don't have a choice. I will prepare all the documents and come to your house tomorrow to sign them, Ben said quickly. The assistant congratulated Elizabeth and Christopher on their anniversary, wished them a good evening, and hurried away. At last he looked very intently at Christopher. The man could not decipher the emotion that lurked in his gaze. A calm and happy continuation of the evening was out of the question. Elizabeth didn't bother to give her gift. The next morning Ben came even earlier than Elizabeth and Christopher had time to clean up. The aide had to wait, and at breakfast they sat down together at the table. I thought a lot about what you said last night, Elizabeth said while Ben was preparing the papers. She had indeed thought about what the assistant had told her, but she didn't analyze his words. Didn't try to find a setup. Elizabeth was thinking about exactly how she could avoid the consequences. It seemed to her that simply transferring the company to her husband was not enough. "Christopher and I should probably get a divorce," she said. Christopher immediately rose from his seat. Ben darted his eyes at his boss. "So what do you think? Do you think the IRS employs fools?" Elizabeth reasoned. "They won't realize we just redid the paperwork when they smell something fishy. If we're divorced, there'll be fewer questions." "Don't worry and don't do anything rash," Ben cautioned Elizabeth. "First of all, we'll do it retroactively. Secondly, we need it more for the competitor than for verification. After all, he wants to deal with you specifically, not your case." "Liz." "I don't like this," said Christopher, who had just been standing there. "I'm definitely not getting a divorce." Elizabeth sighed, waving her hand. "Give me your papers," she said. Doomedly, she leafed through a couple of documents, but more for the sake of appearances, she didn't even read what was written there. She had no reason not to trust Ben. They'd been working together for years. "The documents are signed," the assistant put everything in a folder and promised to straighten everything out. "Expect my call with good news," Ben said. Elizabeth thanked him and finally touched her cup of coffee, which had already managed to become cold. By evening, it had come to Elizabeth's attention that she hadn't gotten herself a copy of the paperwork, that the whole thing was kind of weird in general. In short, Elizabeth began to realize that she had made a mistake. She quickly grabbed her phone and texted her assistant to bring or courier her a copy of the contract. "You don't look well at all," said Christopher, who was suddenly at Elizabeth's side. "I suggest you have a glass of your favorite wine and calm down." He took out a bottle and a glass, quickly filled it, and handed it to his wife. Elizabeth took the drink, thanking him. She stared at one point and thought about something of her own. "I think I did the stupidest thing of my life today," she said quietly and took a sip. "You're just nervous, aren't you?" Christopher tried to reassure her. "You've been thinking about it all day, so you've been having strange thoughts. Have some wine, lie down and rest. Today is done, and tomorrow there will be other things to do. New worries, fresh thoughts." Elizabeth asked Christopher to sit down next to her. As soon as he lowered himself onto the couch, the girl laid her head on his shoulder. She was swollen from just one sip, immediately pulled to sleep. "You're right. I'm so tired that I don't know what I'm thinking. My eyes are closing," Elizabeth said. "Don't fight it," Christopher said, stroking her head. "You need to rest. You didn't sleep much the night before. You've been on edge all day today, so take care of yourself." Elizabeth relaxed in the warm embrace of her lover, took a couple more sips, set the glass on the small table near the sofa, then returned her head to her husband's shoulder and gradually slid into his lap. Christopher continued to stroke Elizabeth's hair and tell her that everything would be all right. He was scared himself, but he held on for the sake of keeping Elizabeth from worrying even more. Someone had to keep a cool head. Elizabeth hadn't opened her eyes yet, but she already realized something was wrong. Her head ached as if she had emptied several bottles of wine last night instead of just a few sips. She didn't want to open her eyes, so Elizabeth decided to sleep a little longer. She rolled over onto her other side and froze. She realized she wasn't in her own bed because she felt a huge, hard pillow under her head. It was like the one her grandmother had in the village. Elizabeth had always thought it weighed 50 pounds and could kill someone if she wanted to. In her house, there were no such pillows in any bedroom. No sofa could have such a thing. Her cheek was stabbed and feathery. And that feeling, too, was from a distant childhood. Elizabeth's inside were several things that someone had hastily left. They were not folded, they were lying in a heap. In a separate pocket lay a passport and a few other documents. "Very interesting," Elizabeth stretched out. "Did I run away from home or something?" "Apparently something happened yesterday that made me run away from home. But I couldn't reconstruct the events of the previous day at all. All I remembered was the evening by the fireplace, my head on Christopher's shoulder, and the glass in front of me. I only took a couple sips. There was no way that amount of alcohol could have caused my memory loss." Elizabeth rummaged through more of her suitcase, hoping to find a cell phone there. But there was nothing there. Without that gadget, the girl certainly wouldn't run. She couldn't imagine her life without a smartphone at all. Elizabeth stepped outside. The sunlight hurt her eyes, which were used to semi-darkness. The girl put her palm to her forehead to cover herself a little from the sun and looked around. There were several other huts nearby, as poor and dilapidated as the one in which she had awakened. Some of the huts were definitely abandoned, but the closest one was clearly inhabited. And suddenly Elizabeth noticed an old woman sitting on a bench in the yard of a neighboring house. The girl decided that she could help her. In fact, Elizabeth was very happy when she saw someone alive in the middle of nowhere. She immediately ran up to her neighbor. As she got closer, Elizabeth discovered that the neighbor was not the infirm old woman she had thought she was at first sight. It was just that she was dressed in a very rustic way that gave age. "How do you do?" Elizabeth said. "I apologize for disturbing you, but could you tell me where I am and how I came to be here?" The neighbor looked at her carefully. The woman's eyes were so pale, as if transparent. She seemed to know something, but she was in no hurry to tell. "My name is Elizabeth," she introduced herself, thinking it would help her to make the old woman feel at ease. "She's alive after all," the neighbor suddenly said, which completely disconcerted Elizabeth. "I saw them bringing you in yesterday. I thought they were trying to close the crime. I almost called the police. But there's no cell phone service here." Elizabeth asked the woman to tell her what she'd seen, and then remembered to get the stranger's name. "My name is Mary Adams," the neighbor replied. "I suffer from insomnia. I couldn't sleep last night, and then I heard something. It was late at night. A car came to the window." "The car was parked in front of the neighbor's house," said Mary. "I thought my old lady was coming back. But no. 2 men got out of the car, carried you in their arms, carried you into the house, and drove away." Elizabeth, barely able to stay on her feet, asked Mary to describe the men. "I know it was dark, but can you remember anything? Or the make of the car?" Elizabeth asked, folding her arms across her chest in a gesture of pleading. "I could see clearly. They were shining their headlights so bright that half the village could see them," Mary Adams replied, describing the 2 men who had carried Elizabeth into the house. The girl listened to Mary and could not believe her ears, trying to find some excuses and explanations. She hoped the old woman was wrong after all, but there could be no doubt. After the neighbor described the car, Elizabeth was already sure that her husband and her assistant had brought her here. But how was that possible? Elizabeth didn't even know they knew each other. To her mind, the whole thing was just unthinkable. "Did they talk about anything?" she asked. "I can't tell you that now," Mary Adams replied. "I see well for my age, but I don't hear very well. Not even a little," the old woman said guiltily. It was impossible to hear anything. Elizabeth thanked her neighbor once again, went back to her new home. Mary Adams shouted to her that the house was abandoned, so she could stay there as long as she saw fit. "And you can come and see me. I'm the only one living here," she added. "Thanks, but I'm going into town. By the way, can you tell me how to get there?" Elizabeth stopped and asked. The girl stood at the bus stop and borrowed some money from Mary Adams for transportation. She left her things with her too, because she didn't want to carry a suitcase. All she took with her was her passport. She had to walk to her house, which was in the most remote part of the city. Her cottage was located in a place that was considered elite. It was something like a village for the rich. The only way to get there was with a pass, which Elizabeth didn't have with her, of course. But the guard at the gate let her in for old time's sake. What confused her was that he did so reluctantly. "Peter Stephen, have you already forgotten me for one night?" Elizabeth joked. But all she got in response was the guard's embarrassment and a guilty look. "You will go to the house and find out everything there. I'm forbidden to let you in, And I'll probably get a lot for disobeying orders, Peter replied after a long pause. Elizabeth did not understand anything, although she was beginning to guess. Only yesterday she had signed the papers transferring her business to her husband, and today she had been chased out of the house. The only thing she couldn't understand was why she wasn't allowed in the house. It had nothing to do with the company anymore. Elizabeth rang the bell. At the gate, the door was opened by an unfamiliar man. It was the guard. Elizabeth guessed from the uniform. "This is my house. Let me in," she said calmly. "Not true. The mistress is home now," the guard answered her. "This is the first time I've ever seen you." "No wonder, since it's the first day you've worked here." Elizabeth laughed nervously. "Get out of my way. I'm the boss." Just then Elizabeth noticed a young girl behind the guard. She was strolling across the courtyard in an icy silk robe. Elizabeth couldn't stand it. She tried to lunge at the imposter, but the guard grabbed the girl and threw her straight to the ground. "What's going on here?" Elizabeth screamed. "I'm in some parallel universe." The girl, who was strolling through the courtyard, noticed the guest, walked smoothly to the gate, and looked at Elizabeth haughtily. "This is my home now," said the stranger, smiling smugly. "And Christopher is mine at last. And you can go wherever you like, but don't set foot here again." So Elizabeth wasn't crazy. It was all Christopher's doing. That was Elizabeth's suspicion, but she couldn't understand why she didn't own the house either. The only place she could find out the truth was in her office. That's where Elizabeth decided to go. She had to walk again, because she didn't even have money for a cab. She was terrified of being kicked out of her own company, but she had to talk to her husband, no matter what it took. She approached the building where her office was located, noticing that the guards had changed there as well. When only he had time to organize all this, the girl wondered. She had already guessed that she wouldn't be allowed in here now either. But she had to talk to Christopher at any cost. She was lucky she saw that her car, which apparently didn't belong to her anymore either, had pulled into the parking lot. Christopher got out of the car, wearing a nice business suit, and a very satisfied look on his face. His face showed that he felt he was the ruler of the world. "He's getting into character fast," Elizabeth thought. She ran up to the bridge, jumped on him from behind and started hitting him on the shoulders, on the head, shouting insults, while the passers-by watched with interest. The guards ran out of the building and took Elizabeth off Christopher's back. The girl, mad with anger, waved her hand at them, saying, "It's okay, he'll sort it out." But as soon as the guard let Elizabeth go, she threw herself at her husband again and began to beat him with her palms. She didn't know how to fight. She just swung her arms left and right, not even looking where she was hitting. One of the guards grabbed her by the waist, and Elizabeth continued to flail her arms and legs like a bug that has fallen on its back and can't turn over. "I understand your anger, but don't embarrass yourself," Christopher said. "Why are you driving my car? Is there a girl walking around in my house?" Elizabeth shouted. "I've already realized that you've taken the company away from me, but what does that have to do with the property?" "You should have read the documents you signed more carefully," Christopher said calmly. Elizabeth froze. She was no longer hysterical. She realized that she had signed over everything to him. She had no chance of getting anything back. "Was your mistress in the house?" she asked with a hint of contempt. "How long have you been with her?" "It doesn't matter," Christopher said. "Get out of here before they force you out. You're free to go. The divorce petition has already been filed." Elizabeth was released. She didn't throw herself. She stayed where she was and just watched her traitorous husband go to her office, where he would run her business, live in her house and drive her car. She was so stunned by her spouse's insolence and meanness that she couldn't cry or get angry, nothing. And then she noticed Ben coming out of the office. The former assistant was obviously in a great mood, walking almost at a gallop. Elizabeth rushed over to him. "Why did you do that?" she asked, grabbing Ben by his jacket. He was scared. He hadn't expected to see his former boss. He tried to say something, but he couldn't get a complete sentence out of his mouth out of excitement. He said he didn't know anything, that it was all Christopher's plan. And he wasn't lying about the tests. They were indeed planned. "How could you not know when you brought me documents to sign that said I was giving my husband all my assets? Did you deliberately frame your speeches to confuse me as much as possible? To panic me?" "I really didn't know. They slipped me the wrong papers," Ben continued to lie. "You brought me into the house. Elizabeth came by with Christopher. Did the neighbor see you? Stop lying to me. You set this whole thing up together. By the way, why don't I remember anything?" "Guilt. I was interrupted." Ben lowered his eyes. He realized that there was no point in lying anymore. His complicity in this crime was obvious. And then behind the man's back some girl screamed. "Oh, brother." Elizabeth recognized that voice at once. It was that thin, gentle voice that had told her hours ago that she was no longer welcome in the house. Ben's face showed that he was not happy with the situation. He didn't want his former boss to know his motives for this deception. "So that's what this is all about," Elizabeth said when she saw the girl. "It's your sister. Have you taken care of the family welfare?" "Elizabeth, you were told to leave." "Go on your way," Ben said when he realized there was no point in hiding anymore. "You can't prove anything. If you go to the police, they'll send you straight to forensics." Elizabeth didn't understand. What kind of examination would they send her to? But Ben quickly explained to her that she had blacked out the day before for a reason. The girl had already guessed that something had been spiked in her wine, and the assistant confirmed it. "The police have been alerted to your case. Unless you want to end your days in a mental institution or behind bars, you'd better not go to the police," Ben warned her. "You've done your homework," Elizabeth said through gritted teeth, clenching her fists. Ben's sister, Sandy, hid behind him because she saw Elizabeth's fighting spirit, but her brother reassured her. "Sandy, don't worry. She won't have time to hurt you. The guards are already on standby," he said. Elizabeth decided to take her almost ex-husband's advice and not embarrass herself anymore. She walked Ben and her sister to the door and then kicked her former assistant's car with all her might. Security guards immediately ran out of the office, and Elizabeth rushed out. She stopped when she had run out of strength and there was no pursuit. Elizabeth was literally gasping for breath. She had never run so much and so fast before. If she could escape from the guards, she could not escape from her own thoughts. Elizabeth realized that through her own stupidity and carelessness, she had lost everything she had earned and accumulated through years of hard work. Elizabeth sobbed. She sat upright on the ground, leaning her back against some unremarkable stall. "Girl, are you scaring my customers like this?" said the indignant stall clerk, who had been listening to Elizabeth crying and mumbling to herself for a long time. But when the woman saw Elizabeth, her mood changed. She realized that the poor girl was in trouble. She could tell by the crying. But Elizabeth looked decent, so she was trustworthy. The woman even asked if Elizabeth needed any help. "If it is not difficult to borrow $3 from me for a ticket to the village," said the girl. "I'm asking for a loan. When I have the money, I will definitely pay you back." "Take one," said the woman and handed Elizabeth a bill. "We'll pay it back, or we won't. That's another matter. At least you can buy yourself something to eat." Elizabeth was also ashamed to accept the handout, but she was in no position to refuse it. She promised herself that she would be sure to pay back Mary Adams, who had given her money for her journey from the village. With that saleswoman, she was sure she would find a way out of the hole she had fallen into through her own gullibility and foolishness. Elizabeth returned to the village. She didn't know where else to go. She had no place in the city in which to find shelter, and here some of her belongings remained, and at least one acquaintance who was willing to take in and help was sweet old Mary Adams. "Yes, the boys are very brazen these days," Mrs. Adams said, listening to Elizabeth's story of how she came to be in this village. The girl had bought the cheapest waffles and cake for her neighbor to thank her for her help. They sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Mary Adams was thinking about how she could help the unfortunate girl, and Elizabeth was thinking about how she could get out of her plight. Though she was engaged in business, she had failed to make any useful connections. The girl did not participate in dubious schemes, did not give bribes, so she could not agree with anyone. The partners did not care who ran her company, she herself or her ex-husband. Mary offered Elizabeth to stay the night at her house, but Elizabeth declined. She felt that she had already squeezed the woman too much. There was no light in the house Christopher and Ben had put her in, but Elizabeth didn't need it. She lit a candle she'd also borrowed from a neighbor. It was enough. It seemed to Elizabeth that she would not be able to sleep and would think about her problems all night. But her strength left her, and she fell asleep as soon as she put her head on the pillow. In the morning, Elizabeth decided to make some improvements to her new home. There was no telling how long she would have to spend here. She wanted to create some semblance of comfort. For the first time, she noticed the decoration of the room. The house seemed to have been abandoned not too long ago. Dust had already accumulated on the shelves, but it didn't look like it had been there for years. In the kitchen drawers, there were still packets of pasta, cereal with expiration dates that hadn't expired. The first thing Elizabeth did was dust. She decided to find a rag and suddenly noticed a note in the most prominent place in front of the front door. She assumed it was a message from her ex-husband to her. With trembling hands, she took the note, began to read it, and from the very first line she realized that the letter was not meant for her. It began with the words, "My dear daughter." Her mother had died a long time. Elizabeth remembered, sitting down at the table, and the dishes gave off such an appetizing aroma that she wanted to start breakfast as soon as possible. Lucy lived in that house. Immediately the memories rushed back to her mind. Mary Adams was a good womankind. She hadn't been gone that long, not even a year. Lucy and her daughter were unlucky. Did they fight a lot? A lot. "That's interesting to me," Elizabeth said and put the note on the table. Mary put on her glasses, picked up the letter, ran her eyes over it quickly. After reading it, she put her glasses back on the table and looked out the window. She seemed to have tears in her eyes as well. Because of such foolishness, frankly, they feared, Mary said after a long pause. Elizabeth had already managed to whip up a couple of pancakes in the meantime. Catherine is Lucy's daughter. She found a young man in town who wasn't young at all and was about 15 years older, probably, but rich. Lucy did not accept such a son-in-law. They called her daughter all sorts of names, but she and her fiancé come to visit together. That was the last time Catherine visited her mother, and she told her not to show her face here. Elizabeth set aside the pies and pancakes, listened intently to the story. The girl had lost her mother early. She couldn't imagine how one could choose a groom between a fiancé and a family member. Elizabeth could not condemn either mother or daughter. It seemed to her that a compromise should have been made, but it was easy to reason when the situation didn't concern you. Anyway, after a few months, Lucy regretted everything she'd said. The daughter did not answer the phone and did not come to visit, finished the story Mary Adams. And then Lucy decided to move to the city. Hoped that at least there she will have the opportunity to meet with her daughter. But where Catherine went, she didn't know. So now I don't know if they ever met. "Somehow I'm dying to know," Elizabeth said suddenly. "I have the address. I'll go and ask. And at the same time I'll confess that I've taken over her house." Elizabeth was telling the truth. The thought occurred to her as soon as she read the letter. She wanted to hug the poor woman and feel sorry for her. But she didn't have enough money for the journey. The town was farther away from the village than the one Elizabeth lived in. Therefore, the ticket would cost more. But Mary Adams offered to help her again. Elizabeth was embarrassed, but she would not refuse. The girl was still sure that she would not be in this predicament forever. One day she would have the opportunity to pay back everyone who was helping her. Elizabeth went to Lucy's the next morning. She was ready to go earlier, but the bus left only once a day in the early morning. The girl wondered on the way what she would say to the woman, why she had even considered this trip. But the bus was already pulling up to the train station. It was too late to change her mind. It took Elizabeth about 2 hours to find the right address, and now she stood in front of the door to Lucy's apartment. She tentatively pressed the bell, but it didn't work. Elizabeth already thought that this was a sign that she should go back to the village and continue to think about her own problems, and not solve other people's. But no, she hadn't come all this way just to be scared and come back with nothing. Elizabeth still didn't know why she had come here in the first place or what she would say. But she knocked on the door. No one opened, though Elizabeth knocked several times, and for quite a while. She even thought she heard footsteps outside the door, but no one ever opened. Just as Elizabeth turned around, there was a thud in the apartment, as if something or someone had fallen. There was no doubt about it, the sound came from behind the door behind her. Elizabeth couldn't leave, so she risked opening the door to see if anything was wrong in the apartment and if she needed help. The knob came down and the lock opened. Elizabeth pushed the door open and immediately saw a woman on the floor in the hallway. She seemed to be having a stroke. The girl was frightened. She didn't even have a cell phone to call an ambulance. But Lucy pointed to the kitchen. Elizabeth immediately went where the woman showed her and saw a smartphone on the table. The ambulance came 10 minutes later. Elizabeth went with Lucy to the hospital, spent about an hour in the corridor until the doctor came out to her. "She's fine," the doctor said. "You called the paramedics just in time." Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief, and then the doctor said that they had already spoken to the patient's daughter. They told her that an unknown girl had come to the hospital. Catherine said she'd be here within the hour. "She asked you to wait for her," the doctor said. "I'll wait for her," the doctor said. "I'll wait for her," Elizabeth replied calmly. She had nowhere to be in a hurry. She thought it would be a great opportunity to reconcile mother and daughter. She was even glad that Katie had decided to come after all. She didn't ignore her mother's problems. So it wasn't too late. Katie arrived quickly, less than an hour later. She ran straight to Elizabeth and knelt down in front of her. "Don't be. That's what anyone in my position would do," Elizabeth said, embarrassed. "The doctor said you saved Mom's life," Katie said, getting up from her knees. "I don't know who you are or how you know my mom, but I'm grateful to you. Ask for anything you want." "Come on, I don't need anything. Will you forgive your mother?" Elizabeth said, and handed her the letter she had found in the house. "I didn't go to your mother's house of my own free will. There was this note. It was meant for you, I take it?" Catherine took the sheet, read her mother's message, which had been waiting for almost a year in her home. She couldn't hold back her tears as she read the words written in neat handwriting. Elizabeth noticed the look of guilt, shame, and unspeakable pain in Katie's eyes. "How could I have forgotten about her? She could have died alone," Katie said, sinking down on the bench beside Elizabeth. "But how did you end up in her house and apartment?" The doctor reported that Mama had been taken from the city apartment, not the village. Elizabeth was ashamed to admit that she had moved into Lucy's house without her knowledge. But she saw Kathy as a good and kind person who would certainly not judge her. So Elizabeth decided to tell her the whole story from the beginning, so that Katie would have no more questions for her. "It was an accident of fate," Catherine said when Elizabeth had finished her story. "Stay the night at your mother's in the village. You can't leave tonight anyway, and she will be in the hospital for weeks. Tomorrow morning I will come to visit you and we will talk." Elizabeth thanked the kind girl. She really hadn't thought at all about where she would stay. The buses traveled once a day, not only to the city but also from the city. So she could either walk to the village, which would take her a long time, or take a cab, which Elizabeth simply didn't have the money for. Catherine not only allowed her mother's savior to stay with her, but drove her to the familiar driveway. "I'll be there at 9, Katie said goodbye. I hope you won't be asleep by then." Elizabeth re-entered the apartment she had been in for only a few minutes. She found it cozy, but everything about it suggested that it belonged to a lonely and deeply unhappy woman. There were many framed photographs on the shelves. Each picture was of Catherine at a different time in her life. On one was a baby, on another a first grader with puffy brows, on the third already a graduate in a beautiful ball gown. Lucy loved her daughter and missed her in a strange apartment. It wasn't easy for Elizabeth to get comfortable. She had to get used to the idea that she had no corner of her own now. The girl thought a lot about Catherine, what she wanted to talk to her about, but there was no point in guessing. The only thing left to do was to wait until morning to see if Catherine had been deceived. Catherine knocked on the door at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Elizabeth was surprised that the girl knocked. She was not the mistress of the house, so Catherine could have entered her house unannounced. But Elizabeth even asked permission to enter and clarified exactly where they could set up to talk. "Mother is feeling better and would like to thank you," Catherine said as she sat down at the table in the kitchen. Elizabeth poured tea, but there was nothing else she could offer her guest. She even took the tea bag without asking. "If you don't mind, we'll go to the hospital after we talk," Catherine said. "Of course, I also have to thank your mother after all to get to know her. I'm her lodger." It turned out that Catherine was floundering, did not know how to get to what she wanted to talk about. Elizabeth guessed that Lucy wasn't the topic of conversation. "I remember you telling me your story yesterday," Catherine began to say. "You were running a successful business, and I found some articles about you on the internet. It's amazing that a businesswoman like you could be so foolishly deceived." "I trusted both Ben and my husband," Elizabeth replied, feeling an inexplicable sense of guilt. "I was just intimidated and confused. They were people I didn't expect to be set up at all." "Don't think I'm trying to shame you or make fun of you," Catherine said, as she realized that her words might have sounded like mockery. "Quite the opposite. I would like to discuss some details with you. I have a proposition for you that you'll like, especially given the position you're in." Elizabeth raised her head and squared her shoulders. Her whole appearance showed that she was ready to listen to the terms and offers. Catherine immediately saw in front of her a strong woman, a real businesswoman. Until then, Elizabeth seemed to her as a lost girl. But her ex-husband and assistant could not bury in her a confident businesswoman. "I wasn't, and I'll be honest about it," Catherine said. Before voicing her proposal, or even a request, Catherine told the backstory. She admitted that she married a man who was 18 years older than her. Mary Adams got it a little wrong, but she entered into marriage for love. Catherine also revealed that this was the reason why she and her mom had a fight. Elizabeth was silent about the fact that she was already aware that she was the cause of discord between mother and daughter. "2 months ago, my husband passed away," Catherine said sadly. "No sooner had I recovered from this loss, although not yet, to be honest, as I had to face a new problem: the heirs. Other than our mutual son, only 3 years old, my spouse had no children. His business is passed to me. But I don't understand anything about it. I am afraid that I too could be cheated by assistants and accountants and other employees. Anybody could set me up because I don't understand anything about the paperwork. So I would be very happy if you would become my right hand. Teach me how to run the business and help me get the company out. Because with me at the helm, my late husband's company is going downhill." Elizabeth was pleased that Catherine had decided to entrust her with such a responsible task. Even knowing that she herself was dressed like a little girl. She even asked Catherine if she was embarrassed by that fact. Not at all, Catherine replied calmly. You've been running a successful business for several years. I read that you built your company from scratch. Why can't you promote an established and successful business? Personal motives played into your business. You were deceived by people close to you. I have a different situation. I'd be happy to help you. Elizabeth agreed. Catherine hugged her new acquaintance, thanked her for this answer, offered Elizabeth to immediately give an advance payment so that she could rent an apartment, settle in for the first time, buy food, new clothes. After the conversation, the girls went to Lucy's hospital, where the woman tearfully thanked Elizabeth for saving her life. But she was even more grateful for reconciling with her daughter. After her first day of work, which was Elizabeth's abbreviated day, she drove to the village. The purpose of the trip was one thing: to talk to Mary Adams, to settle her debts. Elizabeth couldn't even figure out what Mary Adams was happier about: the fact that her new neighbor had done well and found a job, or that Lucy had reconciled with her daughter. The woman did not want to accept money from Elizabeth, but she said she would be offended and would not forgive herself if Mary did not accept her debt. Elizabeth also wanted to visit the stall clerk, who was also kind to her. But she had to go to another town for that, not the one where she had settled. Now she didn't want to spend half a day on the bus, so Elizabeth decided that she would thank her when she bought a car. By the way, she was able to do so after 6 months. All in all, in the entire 6 months, Elizabeth had almost completely recovered from her collapse. She became not just an assistant and business consultant for Catherine, she became the second person in her company. The girls were able to not only save the business, but powerfully propel it forward. Catherine was well aware that without Elizabeth's help she could not have done it, and therefore generously thanked the girl with a high salary. Elizabeth had not lost her entrepreneurial spirit. She tried not to waste a lot of money. After she bought an apartment and a car, she started saving for her own business. It was not the first time she started from scratch. She'd already managed to start a business once and create a successful construction firm. So she would do it again. It took the girl 3 years to get back on her feet. She was still a long way from her previous fortune, but last time it had taken her years to get her business off the ground. Now, however, things were progressing much faster. Elizabeth did not forget Mary Adams and the saleswoman, who had been kind to her. She had paid off the second one too, and they had even managed to chat. The woman at the stall was named Tatiana, and she told her that she was deeply unhappy. Her own son had died in a hot spot, and she was all alone. Elizabeth had no idea how many lonely women there were in the world. She thought about the fact that there was no one to take care of them. For example, Mary Adams complained that she herself had to chop wood for the winter, shovel snow, go for water. It is not good for an old woman to do such hard labor. When Elizabeth had her own business and money, she thought about creating a foundation. The girl found volunteers who agreed to help old people and single women with hard physical labor on a free basis. The news of such a fund quickly spread around the city. Elizabeth was even interviewed for the regional channel. Christopher got up early to prepare for the meeting. The company wasn't doing as well as Elizabeth. He was nervous. The partners were refusing to cooperate. If at first no one cared who was at the helm of Elizabeth's company, after a while they realized that there was a difference. Christopher had never been a businessman, and things were not going well for him. He couldn't get organized on one level of his company. There was no way Ben could single-handedly pull the firm off the bottom, and so far they were still afloat. But the outlook for the next few years was bleak. Added to the fact that Christopher not only didn't know how to earn money, he spent it recklessly. And he had an assistant in the form of Sandy. This young beauty didn't worry about money at all. The money from her card, and consequently from Christopher's accounts, flew away like leaves from trees in the fall. Christopher had a habit of eating breakfast with the news. It was a habit he'd had since his days at the car service center. He brewed his coffee, set a plate of freshly cooked scrambled eggs in front of him, and turned up the volume on the TV. Just as he took the first sip of the aromatic, invigorating coffee, the drink immediately spurted out in a fountain onto the table. The thing was, he saw a familiar face on the TV. Elizabeth, in an expensive suit, beautifully styled and wearing expensive jewelry, was talking about her charitable foundation. She was definitely doing well. After the interview, the announcer talked about how Elizabeth is a successful entrepreneur and is already moving the local rich people from the top position. "How is that possible?" "I ripped her off," Christopher said out loud. "If a man has brains, he is not lost in the world," said Sandy, who had just woken up to the smell of coffee. "That can't be said for you." Christopher was, "You realize that without me the end of your empire will come even faster." Ben answered him, who was also furious that his sister had been thrown out on the street like an unwanted kitten. "Don't worry, my ex-wife will fix my affairs," Christopher answered, starting the engine. "She would have fired you anyway. No one would want to work with a traitor." He hung up. Ben looked at his sister, who still couldn't get warm in the car. Did he seriously think Elizabeth would forgive him and welcome him back with open arms? Sandy asked through gritted teeth. "No, of course not. She's not stupid," Ben told her. "But we can try to gain her trust and punish the bastard." "What city does she live in now? Did you see it on the news?" Sandy nodded. Ben smiled and stepped on the gas. He and his sister are going to Elizabeth's place too. Just need to change their sister's clothes first. Ben decided that the mistress shouldn't be taken to see Elizabeth. She would be more able to confide in him without her. Sandy didn't insist. She didn't feel like traveling across town, but she advised her brother to call Elizabeth, because Christopher would definitely be there sooner. Elizabeth enjoyed the beautiful morning. Even though it was getting close to lunchtime, she'd given herself a chance to get some sleep that day. She and Catherine had had a party the night before to celebrate a successful transaction. The peaceful flow of the morning routine was broken by a phone call. Elizabeth had hoped to hear anyone but the man who had left her in the lurch a few years ago. "Ben?" Elizabeth said questioningly. "Did you get the wrong number?" "No. I want to warn you that another man from the past is coming to see you soon," the man said seriously, though his knees were trembling with excitement. "Your ex-husband has found out you're back on the horse and wants to suck on your income. Christopher himself couldn't replicate your success. He's almost out of money." Elizabeth replied that's what she thought. But Ben is worried for nothing. The girl would never forgive her ex-husband in her life, would never believe him. "I understand that." Unlike him, he laughed. "You want to get back at him, don't you? I have an idea." "I'm not surprised you have another plan to trick a man." Elizabeth's former assistant jabbed at him as well. "What I don't understand is, why would you want to do that? I mean, you two are kind of related, and even related." And Ben told him what Christopher had done to him and his sister. So he had a strong motive for revenge too. Elizabeth still agreed to listen to his plan. She found his arguments convincing. Elizabeth was also attracted to the fact that this time her safety would not be threatened. So this wasn't another scheme to take everything away from her. Elizabeth was even looking forward to hearing from her ex-husband. There was no way Christopher could think of a way for him to show up. He wanted to make sure his ex-spouse didn't guess his intentions, as if he didn't know she was rich again. Christopher tracked Elizabeth down, finding out where she lived and worked. As if by chance, he found himself in the same establishment where Elizabeth got her coffee every morning. "What meeting?" Christopher exclaimed, meeting Elizabeth there. Yes, unexpected indeed. Elizabeth played along, who had long known that her husband was tracking her. The guards had already reported to her a few days ago that a man was following her. Christopher asked Elizabeth how she was doing, telling her that he was doing fine except for his love life. "Wow, your mistress only wanted money." Elizabeth ironically repeated after him. "Is this boomerang coming back to you?" "It's not true, I wasn't with you for money." Christopher answered her resentfully. "Ben and his little sister tricked me. She seduced me, and he put me up to it." Elizabeth nodded, looking understanding. It looked very exaggerated, and Christopher could see the obvious mockery on his ex-wife's part. Nevertheless, he was pleased that she did not stop talking to him, listened immediately, and even entered into a dialogue. All of this Elizabeth had done deliberately. She needed to gain his trust so that Christopher would think she had fallen for his bait again. And she succeeded. After the first meeting, Christopher was sure that after a couple more conversations and dates, he would be a rich woman's husband again. And Elizabeth was happy to play along. Each time she forced herself to communicate with her ex-husband, but she realized that without it, her revenge would not happen. She needed to feign trust and warmth toward a man she couldn't stand. Listening to Christopher's words was simply unbearable for her. She realized that he was a masterful liar, and believe her, he really wanted to deceive. Even though she knew that every word he said was a lie. Christopher was getting more and more turned on, because he couldn't tell if Elizabeth trusted him or not. It seemed to him that everything was happening too easily. Immediately, his ex-wife agreed to a date, answered his phone instantly. Was she so starved for a relationship, so lonely that she forgave him so easily? Christopher went on the offensive, sending her gifts, arranging surprises, dates. He thought she was about to melt. Elizabeth stepped over herself when she went to these meetings and smiled sweetly at her traitor husband. She was even more disgusted when she saw Christopher cowering before her, the bastard squealing. "Ben, I'm getting tired of these meetings with my ex-husband. When do we move on to the next phase of the plan?" Elizabeth asked him after another date. "We need to push Christopher into action. Until he's ready to give it all back to you, we're not going to get anywhere," Ben told her. "How do you push him to do that?" "I'm already pretending to be in love and forgiving all the wrongs," Elizabeth clarified. Next to Elizabeth at that moment was Catherine. She came to visit her to discuss personal matters. The girls had become not only business partners, but also best friends. "I have an idea," Catherine said suddenly. Elizabeth immediately put the call on speaker, so that Ben could hear her. Men are most afraid of competition. If Christopher found out that Elizabeth had a suitor for his heart, he would immediately move into decisive action. Ben agreed that it was a good idea. As a man, he confirmed it. Katie then informed him that she had a good acquaintance who would agree to help her. Christopher didn't know how to propose to Elizabeth himself. He still doubted that she had finally forgiven him. Suddenly, he received a call on his work phone. Since Ben had been fired, Christopher scheduled all negotiations and meetings by himself. He received a call from a man who introduced himself as a well-known investor, and Christopher knew his name. It was a man named David. This was a weighty figure in their field. Many people knew him, and everyone dreamed of working with this man. Christopher even straightened his back, although the person on the phone still couldn't see him. Christopher prepared for the meeting with the investor as carefully as for a date. Until the last moment, he didn't believe that the David he had in mind would come to the meeting. But his expectations were justified. After a short negotiation, the businessmen shook hands, but David was in no hurry to leave. "Is it true that Elizabeth Igorevna is your ex-wife?" David suddenly asked. Christopher nodded and immediately tensed. This question did not bode well. David said that a friend of his was interested in the woman. "He begged me to find out if Elizabeth had a boyfriend," David said, blushing. "I'm sorry to bring it up." "That's all right," Christopher coughed. "It's good of you to ask. Elizabeth and I are discussing the possibility of starting a family right now. I want to propose to her because our feelings are back." "That's too bad, because my friend was going to take her out tonight," David said. "But then I'll tell him he has nothing to look forward to." "Yes, please do." Christopher's voice became high, like a frightened boy's. Christopher waited until David left the restaurant and immediately called Elizabeth, asking her not to plan anything for the evening. He had a serious conversation to have. Wow, that worked so fast. Elizabeth was surprised. She knew at once that Christopher had prepared a serious conversation. He had dressed like a real groom, prepared a huge bouquet, and was very excited. Elizabeth sank into a chair and showed that she was ready to listen to him. Christopher pulled some papers out of his briefcase, got down on one knee, and handed Elizabeth the ring. "I want it all back," he said, to prove that he was serious. "I have prepared the documents that will give you everything back, everything that I took away. You will be my wife again." Elizabeth did not hurry to take the ring, open the folder with the documents, read them carefully, every line, every word. When she was sure that this time there was no deceit, she put her signature in the right places. "When did you have time to prepare them?" She was surprised. "But I was on my way to you with them," Christopher said. "You can see the date I wrote and signed them. It shows that I'm serious." While Elizabeth read the papers, Christopher remained on one knee with his arm outstretched. He was very worried. But since the girl signed the papers, then the deed is done. "It's a shame that you're giving me back much less than you took," Elizabeth began to say. And Christopher immediately realized that he was too happy too soon. "And I gave you the company in a very different state of mind. But thank you for that. You can offer your ring to Sandy. I don't need anything else from you, if that's what it takes. I'll make a deal with the police, just like you did. I was wiser this time." Elizabeth took the folder with the documents, got up from the table and left the restaurant. Christopher remained sitting on one knee. He could not believe his ears. He now found himself in Elizabeth's shoes. She had tricked him too. A waiter approached Christopher, asking if he wanted to pay the bill. "What bill?" yelled at the kid, furious. "Didn't you see that? Didn't she just take everything from me? How am I supposed to pay for it?" The waiter was startled by this reaction, but kept his cool. He asked the man to calm down and told him that he would have to call security, and maybe even the police, if Christopher didn't pull himself together and pay for his order. But he had no intention of calming down. Christopher was furious. He was realizing more and more every second that he had literally become a tramp. He threw all sorts of unflattering words at Elizabeth, who could no longer hear him. He started smashing everything, breaking chairs, tables, and sweeping dishes from the tables of other visitors. But he was quickly calmed down and tied up by the guards. "Christopher, why did you embarrass yourself like that?" "You are a respectable man," said the owner of the restaurant. While the bound Christopher and the staff waited for the police, the man's words echoed in Christopher's mind. He remembered how, years ago, he had asked Elizabeth to calm down and not embarrass herself by throwing her fists at him in the middle of the street. He could understand her pain now, her feelings. Only the girl was much more hurt and offended. She had been robbed of her hard-earned blood and sweat, and he had been robbed of something that had never belonged to him. It was cold and calculated revenge. And Christopher accepted defeat. He decided that now he would definitely settle down, go back to his car service. He could try on a rich life and realize that money doesn't just fall out of the sky. He had everything, but he couldn't save it. When Elizabeth walked out of the restaurant, she raised the folder above her head and shouted with joy. And in the car already waiting for her was Katie, who immediately ran out of the car, hugged her friend. The girls went to celebrate their victory in the club. On the way to the club, Elizabeth called Ben and told him that the deed was done. Christopher was left with nothing, and she got back all her own. The man was pleased with the outcome, even venturing to ask if Elizabeth would hire him again. "No, I've had enough of this once," Elizabeth laughed. "I am grateful for your help. I can send you some money to thank you and pay you for your work, for warning me, but you can't expect more than that. I'm sorry, once a man has betrayed you, you can't trust him." "Funny enough talk," exclaimed a happy Katie. We were already at the club. Elizabeth said goodbye, hung up the phone, and looked at the huge building with its thousands of lights on. She had never been to such places, but her friend reassured her that it was a decent place and only rich people vacationed there. And there David was waiting for them. Elizabeth did not know about it. She did not even communicate with him. This Catherine agreed about everything with her friend, and the meeting at the club was organized by her at David's request. The man had long been interested in this young, successful businesswoman. He himself was also young and attractive, but had no success in his personal life. All the girls who literally hung around his neck did not seem worthy to him. Many needed money. Their behavior was not distinguished by modesty. And David wanted to find a decent girl, whom he would see as his future wife and mother of his children. Elizabeth seemed to him just like that, and he fell in love with her at first sight. David later admits to Elizabeth that he could hardly hold a conversation with her ex-husband. He disliked liars and cheaters so much, but when he looked at Christopher and realized that this man had caused a lot of pain to this beautiful girl, the urge to punch him in the face was self-inflicted. Catherine didn't bother to tell Elizabeth that David was actually interested in her friend. The girl wasn't sure if her buddy was ready for a relationship. She hadn't promised David anything except that she would introduce them. And the introduction was a success. Elizabeth was in a good mood, smiling, almost bouncing with happiness. And David just couldn't contain his smile as he watched such a happy and therefore even more beautiful Elizabeth. "I owe you one," Elizabeth said happily to David. "How did you manage to convince my ex-husband that I had a boyfriend, and he signed everything back over to me the same day?" "Men don't like competition," David answered her with a smile. "But I wasn't lying about your suitor. I do have one." David blushed, but because of the darkness in the club, Elizabeth didn't notice it. The confident, successful man who runs a dozen businesses felt at that moment like a schoolboy shy of talking to a girl. Elizabeth danced and behaved casually, not even realizing that her interlocutor was burning with shame and shaking with embarrassment. "Then introduce me to him. What if this is my destiny?" Elizabeth laughed, who was in a great mood, and said it not seriously, more as a joke. But David literally blossomed before her eyes. When he heard these words, Elizabeth, he began to correct his jacket and hair, and then extended his hand to the girl. Elizabeth stopped dancing at this metamorphosis. She looked at David seriously, trying to determine whether she understood correctly what would happen next. "Then let me introduce myself. I am the admirer," he said with contrived importance. It looked ridiculous again, because the man was terribly shy. He tried to give the impression of a serious man, but his excitement was getting in the way. Elizabeth was confused at this point, but she shook his hand. David was a handsome man, and outwardly Elizabeth was attracted to him. But the girl did not think about serious and non-serious relationships. It seemed to her that after her first marriage she would remain a loner forever. Catherine watched from the side how her friend and old comrade communicate. She really wanted Elizabeth to find her happiness, and she knew for a fact that David was the perfect match. He would definitely not be with Elizabeth for the money. He is a loyal and decent man. Those were the arguments she made to her friend the next day. Elizabeth embarrassed. She too was well aware of what an important and powerful businessman David was. She couldn't believe she could be looked up to by a man of such high rank. "And you're not an ordinary girl," either Katie told her. "There's nothing to be surprised about. Give David a chance, you'll never meet anyone like him again." And Elizabeth heeded her friend's advice. She went on a few dates with David, accepted gifts and advances from him, and eventually they formed a beautiful couple. A year and a half later, Elizabeth and David became a family. Elizabeth did meet Christopher. It was unexpected. She had a flat tire somewhere on the outskirts of town, namely near a tire shop. Elizabeth even laughed that the owners of the tire shop had put something on the road just to get a customer. Never before had there been such an expensive car in this godforsaken place. Unfortunately, the owner's only employee was a half-drunk Christopher. Elizabeth recognized him immediately and said she wouldn't let him near the car. She called David and asked him to come and get her and the car. But while she waited for her husband, she decided to talk to Christopher. He told her without much enthusiasm that he had been working at the place since he was released from the police. After the debauch in the restaurant, he lived in a dormitory, and the only joy in his life was a bottle of vodka. Christopher watched with hatred and envy as Elizabeth got into David's car and they drove off to their happy life. To each his own, Christopher said, his voice hoarse with hangover. And we haven't lived rich. There's no reason to start.